Right now, while you are lying there, one side of your nose is doing most of the breathing, the other side has quietly closed itself down. Not by much, just enough. And you did not decide this. You are not stuffed up, you are not sick, there is nothing wrong with you. Somewhere deep in the middle of your head, a small piece of tissue swelled up on purpose on one side and shrank on the other, and it will hold that arrangement for an hour or two, and then, without asking you, it will switch. Put your hand under your nose for a moment if you are still awake enough to bother, and breathe out gently. You will feel it. One stream is fuller, one is thinner. That is not an accident of how you are lying. Well, it is partly that. But it was going to happen anyway. Your body runs this switch all day and all night, every day you have ever lived, and almost nobody notices it is happening. So already we have a small mystery, and I like small mysteries, because the small ones are the ones that turn out to have enormous machines hiding behind them. The mystery is this. Why would a body build a nose that deliberately breathes lopsided? If you were designing a creature and you wanted it to get air, you would open both pipes all the way and be done with it. 2 nostrils, both wide, maximum air. That is the sensible engineering. Instead, the thing you actually have, sitting in the middle of your face, spends its entire life half closing one side and then the other, back and forth forever, for no reason that is obvious at all. And here is where it gets stranger, and this is the part I want you to hold on to as we go, because we are going to be detectives tonight, you and I, and a good detective holds on to the odd little fact that does not fit. A very long time ago, well over 1,000 years ago, people who spent their lives paying extremely close attention to their own breathing wrote down a claim about this. They did not have instruments, they did not have a single electrode or a single microscope, they had nothing but their own attention turned inward for hours a day for years. And they said something very specific. They said the left nostril is a cooling channel. They gave it a name that meant the moon, the cool one, the calming one. And they said, if you are hot, if you are agitated, if your mind is racing and you cannot settle, then close off the right side and breathe slowly through the left, through the moon side, and you will come down. You will cool off. You will calm faster than if you just breathe normally through both. Now stop and notice how strange that claim is. They did not say breathing calms you. Everybody knows breathing calms you. They said something much narrower and much riskier. They said the left specifically, not the right, not both, the left, and they said one side alone would beat both together. That is a very particular thing to claim. It is the kind of claim that is easy to be wrong about, because if calming were just about slow breathing, then both sides would be better than one. More air, more slow, more calm. Their claim runs directly against that, and a claim that sticks its neck out like that is exactly the kind of claim a detective loves, because it can be tested, and either it falls apart or it turns out to be pointing at something real. For a very long time, the West had no idea any of this was going on. Then, in the year 1895, a German physician named Richard Kaiser took a little measuring device and pressed it up against the inside of people's noses, and he measured carefully how much air could actually pass through each side. And he found the swelling. He found that one side was more open and the other more closed, and that the arrangement was not fixed. It shifted. It alternated. He wrote it up in a paper with a very solid, very German title about the exact measurement of the air permeability of the nose. And in the West, this was treated as a brand new discovery, a curiosity of the anatomy. Something nobody had known. Except somebody had known. Somebody had written about the exact same rhythm, and had attached calming instructions to it more than 1,000 years before Kaiser ever picked up his instrument. So one of the first things we notice standing over this case is that 2 completely separate traditions with completely different tools, one of them using no tools at all, both stumbled onto the same fact about the human nose. That does not prove the calming part is true, but it means we are not chasing a fantasy. There is a real physical measurable thing here. The nose really does switch sides. The only question is whether the calming claim, the left specifically, the one over both, whether that part holds up too. A little while after Kayser, in the year 1927, another investigator, a man named Dirks, went looking at a whole normal population, ordinary people, nobody sick, and he found the switching cycle running in about 80% of them. 80 out of 100. So this is not a rare thing. This is not a defect. This is standard equipment. Most people are walking around right now, breathing lopsided on a slow rotating schedule and have absolutely no idea. How slow is the schedule? When you are awake and up and moving, the average time on one side before it flips is a little over 2 hours. Roughly 2 hours per side, though it wanders quite a bit from person to person and even hour to hour in the same person. And when you go to sleep, the whole thing slows down. In sleep, the cycle stretches out to something more like 4.5 hours per side. The switch relaxes when you relax, which is already a hint, isn't it? The rhythm of your nose is tied somehow to the rhythm of the rest of you. It speeds up when you are up and awake and busy. It slows down when you lie down and let go. That is not what you would expect from a dumb plumbing fixture. That is what you would expect from something wired into your nervous system. And there is one more clue in the counting, and this one is the sort of thing you could easily walk right past, so let me slow down on it. When people measured which side the body prefers, over long stretches over a whole day and night, they found the body is not even-handed about it. It spends a bit more of its time with the left side open than the right. The left dominant stretches ran on average a little longer than the right dominant ones. Not by a huge amount, but consistently. The body, left to its own devices, leans slightly toward keeping the moon side open, the very side the old texts called the calming one. Now that could be a coincidence. A detective does not get excited about one number. But you write it down. You keep it, because if the calming story turns out to be real, then a body that spends a little extra time on the left is a body spending a little extra time in a calmer gear, and that starts to look less like a coincidence and more like a design. They found something else in those long recordings too, and it is my favorite clue of the early going. They watched 33 people around the clock, a full day and night each, and they tracked both the nose and the breathing. And they noticed that when a person's breathing slowed down, the nostril dominance got stronger. The two things moved together. Slower breath, more lopsided nose. It was not a perfect lockstep, nothing in the body ever is, but the trend was clearly there, and it was not the kind of thing you get by chance. So the nose is not off doing its own private thing in the corner. It is coupled to how fast or slow you are breathing, which is coupled to how wound up or how settled you are. Everything is talking to everything. So look at what we have got, before we have explained a single thing. We have a nose that deliberately breathes unevenly. We have a slow switch, running for a couple of hours a side, that slows down further when you sleep. We have this pattern in 8 out of 10 ordinary people. We have a gentle preference for the left. We have the whole rhythm tied to how slow you are breathing and how settled you are. And we have two traditions, separated by an ocean and 1,000 years in every possible difference in method, both landing on the same fact, with the older one making a bold and testable extra claim about calm, about the left, about one side beating both. That is our case, and like any good case, the deeper we push into it tonight, the stranger it is going to get before it gets clear. Because to understand why closing one side of your nose might settle your whole body faster than opening both, we are going to have to follow the air. We are going to follow it in through that narrow doorway at the front of the nose, past a piece of tissue that has more in common with certain other parts of the body than you would ever guess, onto a bed of cold sensing nerve endings. Up a nerve as thick as a pencil into the base of the brain, and out to the heart where, if the old texts are right, we should be able to watch the calming actually happen. And I will warn you now, as your partner in this investigation, that there is at least one moment coming where the evidence is going to seem to turn around and point the wrong way entirely. But we will get to that. For now, just breathe and notice which side is open. So let us follow it. Let us follow the air. Take one easy breath in through your nose, no effort, and imagine you could shrink yourself down and ride along with it, the way a leaf rides a stream. The very first thing you would notice is that the door is small. much smaller than you would think from looking at a nose from the outside. There is a spot just inside where the passage pinches down to something like 3 to 5 millimeters across. Rhinologists call it the nasal valve, and it is the narrowest place in the whole airway between the outside world and your lungs. Now here is a number worth sitting with for a moment. That one little pinch point, that tiny doorway no wider than a couple of grains of rice laid side by side, is responsible for roughly 66% of all the resistance in your upper airway. 2/3. Not the throat, not the windpipe, not the deep passages. That little valve at the front of your nose is where most of the fight happens. So already you begin to suspect something. If you close one side, you have not just cut the airflow in half, you have done something to the single most important bottleneck in the system. That feels like it might matter. Hold that thought. We will come back and interrogate it later, because it is going to try to fool us. Ride the air a little further in. Just past that narrow valve, something changes about the way the stream moves. Out at the very front, in the little chamber called the vestibule, the air comes in fairly smoothly, in orderly layers, the way water flows in a lazy canal. Physicists call that laminar flow, layers sliding past one another without much mixing. But then, right as the air rushes past the valve and comes up on the front edge of the first big shelf of tissue inside, the flow breaks up. It tumbles. It stops being orderly layers and becomes a churning, swirling, chaotic thing. That is turbulent flow, and it is the same difference you see between a smooth river and the white water where it pours over the rocks. Now you might think turbulence is a nuisance, a bit of sloppiness the body would rather avoid. But it is exactly the opposite. The turbulence is the point, because in smooth laminar flow, the air molecules travel in tidy lanes, and the ones in the middle of the stream never actually touch the walls. They just glide right through the center and out again, having met nobody. But when the flow tumbles and churns, molecules from the very center of the stream get thrown against the sides. They collide with the lining of the nose, and the lining of the nose is where all the sensors are. So the body has arranged things, whether by luck or by long slow tuning over ages, so that the air does not slide politely past its instruments. It is made to crash into them. Turbulence is how the air introduces itself to the brain. Keep going. Now you come up alongside the tissue itself, and this is where our little investigation takes its first genuinely strange turn, the one I promised you. Lining the side wall of each nasal passage are these long curled shelves of tissue called the turbinates, and the big one down low, the inferior turbinate, is the one doing the work in our story. If you could put a piece of it under a microscope, you would find something you did not expect at all. It is riddled with a dense network of hollow blood spaces, little caverns, sinusoids that can fill up with blood and swell, or drain and shrink on command. And here is the part that makes people sit up. That tissue, in the way it is built and the way it behaves, is functionally the same kind of tissue as the erectile tissue found in certain other, more famously changeable parts of the body. I am not making a joke, and I am not exaggerating for effect. Anatomically, it is cavernous erectile tissue. It engorges. It swells with blood to close the passage, and it drains of blood to open it. Your nose, on each side, contains a soft hydraulic valve that inflates and deflates. And that right there is the machinery behind the whole mystery. Because when one nostril is more open than the other tonight, it is not because of mucus or a cold or the way you are sitting, at least not mostly. It is because one of those spongy shelves has quietly filled with blood and swollen shut, while the other has drained and opened up. Your body is running a slow, patient, invisible pump inside your face, and it has been running it your whole life, and you almost certainly never felt it happen. Now the natural question, the one any good partner in an investigation would ask, is who is running the pump? What decides which side fills and which side drains? And the answer takes us up out of the nose and into the base of the brain to a little region called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is one of those ancient bookkeeping centers, the part of you that quietly manages temperature and hunger and the daily rhythms, the housekeeper that never sleeps. And it turns out the hypothalamus is holding both ends of a single rope. On one end is the branch of your nervous system that revs you up, the sympathetic branch, the part that gets you ready to run or to fight. On the other end is the branch that settles you down, the parasympathetic branch, the rest and digest side, the part that slows the heart and starts the stomach working after a meal. Here is the trick the hypothalamus plays, and it is a lovely piece of engineering. It does not turn both nostrils the same way at once. It plays them against each other. On the side it wants to open, it sends a jolt of sympathetic signal, and that squeezes the blood vessels tight, drains the spongy tissue, thins the lining, and throws the passage wide open. And at the very same moment, on the other side, it lets the parasympathetic branch take over, and that relaxes and dilates the vessels, floods the sponge with blood, swells it up, and gently closes the passage down. One side revved, the other side rested. One draining while the other fills. The two halves of your nose are running on opposite branches of your nervous system at the same instant, like two dancers turning in opposite directions, joined at the center. And it is worth naming the actual messengers, because the body speaks in chemistry and it helps to hear the words. On the side that is opening, the sympathetic nerves release a substance called norepinephrine, which acts quickly, and alongside it a second, slower acting molecule called neuropeptide Y. And together those clamp the vessels down and hold them down, so the passage stays open for a good while. On the side that is closing, the parasympathetic nerves release a different set of messengers, acetylcholine among them, and a molecule called vasoactive intestinal peptide, and the little gas nitric oxide, which is a famous relaxer of blood vessels. Those swing the vessels open, let the sponge engorge, and start the glands making mucus. So the whole slow seesaw of your nasal cycle, this 2.5-hour tilting back and forth that you never notice, is nothing but the two branches of your autonomic nervous system taking turns, written out in the swelling and draining of a little bed of erectile tissue behind your face. When I first really understood that, I remember thinking, well, isn't nature a sly one? She built a mood ring into the middle of your skull, and the color it shows is which nostril is open. But we are not solving the puzzle just by admiring the pump. Remember what we are actually after. We want to know why deliberately closing the left side, breathing only through the left, might settle the whole body down faster than breathing through both. And so far, all we have done is establish that the nose has this beautiful two-sided valve wired straight into the balance of calm and alarm. That is the machinery. It does not yet tell us the direction. It does not tell us why left should be the cooling side rather than right, or why one side alone should beat two sides together. For that, we have to keep following the air one step further, past the sponge, down to the actual nerve endings buried in that lining, the little sensors the turbulence has been so carefully throwing air against. Because it is one thing for the brain to reach down and set the valve. It is another, and a far stranger thing, for the valve to reach back up and tell the brain how to feel. And that, I think, is the real secret hiding in this whole business. The signal does not only run one way. The air you pull across those sensors is talking back. So let us go and meet the sensors. Let us find out what exactly a nerve ending in your nose is listening for. And I will tell you in advance, so you can enjoy the surprise when it comes, that the thing it is listening for is not pressure, and it is not really airflow at all, not directly. What it is listening for is cold. Keep breathing, slow and easy, and feel, if you can, the faint coolness at the back of the passage as the air goes by. That coolness is the whole message. That is what the brain is reading. So picture a nerve ending, not the whole nerve, not the thick cable of it, but the very tip, the frayed little end that sits just under the wet lining of your nose. It is bare there. It is exposed, the way a fingertip is exposed when you take off a glove. And sitting in the skin of that nerve ending, studded into it like little windows set into a wall, are proteins. Special ones. Each one is a channel, a doorway that can be shut or open, and when it opens it lets a small trickle of electric charge into the nerve. Enough of those doorways open at once and the nerve fires. It sends its pulse up the line toward the brain, saying something is happening down here. Pay attention. Now the question that matters is this: what opens the doorway? What is the key? And for this particular family of channels, the one the scientists have named with a string of letters and a number, the one we can just call the cold channel, the key is temperature. When the tissue around it cools, the doorway opens. When the tissue warms back up, the doorway drifts shut again. That is its whole job. It is a thermometer that speaks in electricity. It does not know about wind. It does not know about pressure or pushing or the force of air. It knows cold, and only cold, and it shouts about cold to anyone upstream who will listen. And here is where it gets lovely. When you breathe in, the air coming through your nose is almost always cooler than the warm, wet tissue lining the passage. Even on a summer evening, the air is a little cooler than your body, and your body is a steady warm thing, close to 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit deep inside. So the incoming air brushes past that lining and steals a little heat from it. It cools the surface. Not much. A few degrees right at the skin of it. But that is exactly what the cold channel is waiting for. The lining cools, the doorways open, the nerve fires. Every inhale is a little pulse of cold, and every little pulse of cold is a little pulse of signal marching up toward the brain. Do you see what has happened here? Your brain is not measuring how much air went through. It has no flow meter down there, no little windmill spinning in the breeze counting liters. What it has is a cold sensor, and it uses the cold as a stand-in for the flow. More air moving past means more heat carried away, means more cooling, means more firing. Less air means less cooling, means the sensor goes quiet. The brain reads the temperature and quietly, cleverly infers the wind. It is a trick, and it is a very old trick, and it works beautifully as long as you never stop to notice that the thing being measured is not the thing you care about. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it is one of those ideas that seems small and turns out to be enormous. Your sense of how open your nose is, the very feeling of breathing freely or breathing stuffed up, is not built from airflow. It is built from cold. This is why when you suck on a strong mint or breathe in some of that sharp menthol vapor, your nose feels like it has thrown open every window, like the air is rushing through as though you were standing on a mountaintop. And yet, if you measured it, if you pressed a real instrument against that nose, you would find the airflow has barely changed at all. What changed is that the menthol reached into the tissue and pried open the cold doorways directly, chemically, without any actual cooling. It fooled the sensor. It told the brain a lie about the temperature, and the brain, trusting its old reliable thermometer, reported a great gust of fresh air that was never there. That is a marvelous thing to know. It means the whole feeling of a clear nose is in a sense a story the brain tells itself from a single cold reading. And it means we have found something important for our little investigation. Because if the message the brain gets from each nostril is a cold message, a firing of these thermal doorways, then the amount of that firing depends on how much cooling happens, and the amount of cooling depends on how much air sweeps across the senses. And now, at last, we can see why which nostril is open should matter to the brain at all. The open nostril, the one the sympathetic side has drained and shrunk and opened wide, has fast air moving through it, plenty of cooling, plenty of firing. It is sending a loud, bright, steady stream of cold signals upward. The closed nostril, swollen and congested, has slow, weak air creeping through it. Hardly any cooling, hardly any firing. It is nearly silent. So the two sides of your nose are not sending the brain the same message. One is loud and one is a whisper. And they whisper and shout into different doors, as we shall see, and the brain does something with that difference. But before we chase the signal upward, I want to stay down here in the nose a little longer, because there is a piece of the physics I have skipped past, and it is too pretty to skip. Think about how the air actually moves. When it first comes in through the nostril, through that narrow gate at the front, it moves the way water moves in a smooth, slow stream, in neat parallel layers sliding over one another. We call that smooth kind of flow laminar, which is just a word for layered. In smooth layered flow, the air in the very middle of the stream stays in the middle. It races straight down the passage and never touches the walls. And that is a problem if you are a cold sensor stuck to the wall, because the coldest, freshest air, the air with the most heat still to steal, is exactly that middle air, and in smooth flow, it sails right past you without ever brushing your skin. But the nose does not let the flow stay smooth. Just past that narrow gate, right where the air spills into the wider chamber and rushes up against the front edge of that swollen shelf of tissue, the flow breaks. It tumbles. It goes from neat layers into a churning, rolling, chaotic swirl. We call that turbulent flow, and usually, in a pipe or a chimney, turbulence is a nuisance, something engineers try to smooth away because it wastes energy. But here in the nose, the turbulence is the whole point, because when the air tumbles and rolls, the middle air gets thrown against the walls. The cold, fresh center of the stream is flung outward, again and again, onto the lining, onto the sensors. The churning mixes the stream so that every part of the air gets its turn touching the wall and giving up its heat. Without the turbulence, the cold message would be faint and muffled. With it, the message rings clear. Your nose is shaped, deliberately, exquisitely, to make the air stumble at just the right spot, so that it will press its coldness against the very nerves that are waiting to read it. Is that not a wonderful piece of design, or of luck, or of both? A narrow gate to speed the air up, and then a sudden widening and an obstacle right where it counts, to trip the fast air into a tumble, so the cold can reach the skin. The whole front of your nose is an instrument for delivering temperature to a thermometer, and the amount of tumbling, the vigor of that churn, depends on how fast the air is going, which depends on how open the nostril is, which depends once again on which branch of that great automatic nervous system happens to be holding this side of your nose at this moment of the night. So we have followed the chain a long way now. Let me lay the links out gently, the way you might lay out stones you have gathered on a beach just to look at them. The hypothalamus, deep in the brain, decides which side gets the draining, opening sympathetic tone, and which side gets the swelling, closing parasympathetic tone. That decision sets how open each nostril is. How open the nostril is sets how fast the air moves, and how hard it tumbles, and how much heat it carries off the lining. The heat carried off sets how much the cold channels open. The cold channels set how loudly the nerve fires. And the nerve carries that firing back up, toward the very brain that set the whole thing in motion. A loop. A circle. The brain reaches down and sets the valve, and the valve, through the cold and the tumbling air, reaches back up and reports to the brain. And a thing that talks to itself in a circle like that is a thing that can settle into states, that can lean one way and hold there, that can be nudged and will nudge itself. We are no longer looking at a simple pipe. We are looking at something that listens to its own breathing and answers back. And so the natural next question, the one that ought to be tickling at you now as the air goes cool across the back of your throat, is this. What does the brain actually do with a message that comes in stronger from one side than the other? When the left whispers loud and the right whispers soft, where does that lopsided little report go, and why on earth should it change the way you feel? Keep breathing, slow and easy. We are about to follow the signal across the border, out of the nose entirely, and up into the strange, divided country of the brain itself. So let us do exactly that. Let us climb aboard that lopsided little report and ride it inland. The signal leaves the mucosa, gathered up by the trigeminal nerve, that great facial nerve that carries touch and cold and the faint sting of onions from the whole front of your head. And here is the first thing that ought to make you sit up, or rather lie back a little more comfortably and wonder. The message from the left nostril does not immediately cross over to the far side of the brain the way you might expect from everything you have heard about the body being wired in crossing patterns. The airflow information from one nostril travels up to the hypothalamus on the same side it came from. Ipsilateral, the anatomists call it, which is just a long word meaning the signal keeps to its own lane. Left stays left, right stays right, at least at first. And the hypothalamus, that small, deep governor sitting near the base of the brain, the very same little manager we met earlier, deciding which turbinate to swell and which to shrink, takes this arriving whisper and does something with it. It leans on the hemispheres. It nudges one side of the great wrinkled cortex above it more than the other. Now follow the chain carefully, because this is the hinge the whole mystery turns on, and I want you drowsy but not lost. Air moving through the left nostril lights up, preferentially the right hemisphere of the brain. Air moving through the right nostril lights up, preferentially the left hemisphere. It sounds backward, and yet there is a crossing built in somewhere along the way that flips the bookkeeping, so that the left of the nose ends up talking most loudly to the right of the brain. Hold on to that. Left nostril, right hemisphere. Say it to yourself as the breath goes cool and slow. And why should that matter one bit to how calm you feel? Because the two halves of the brain, as best we can tell from a great pile of careful and sometimes quarrelsome experiments, do not lean the same way when it comes to the body's inner throttle. The right hemisphere tends to associate with the parasympathetic side of things. That is the rest branch, the digest branch, the slow the heart, soften the shoulders, let the gut do its quiet work branch. The left hemisphere tends to associate more with the sympathetic side, the branch that speeds the heart and readies the muscles and leans the whole animal forward into action. I want to be honest with you here, because honesty is the only thing that makes any of this worth listening to. This left and right split in the brain is not as clean and settled as the tidy plumbing of the nose. It is real, it shows up again and again, but it is contested at the edges, and any scientist who tells you the two hemispheres are simply a calm one and a nervous one is selling you a cartoon. Nature is messier than that, and it is more interesting for being messier. But the lean is there, and if you grant the lean, even just for tonight, look what falls out of it. Breathe through your left nostril, and you feed the right hemisphere. Feed the right hemisphere, and you tip ever so slightly toward the branch that calms. It is as if the body had a dimmer switch for its own alarm system hidden inside a nostril, and the yogis 1500 years ago, with no rhinometer, no electrode, no idea what a hypothalamus was, felt their way to that switch in the dark and left us instructions. Pierce the lunar channel, they said. Breathe the moon side. And here is a physiologist, centuries and centuries later, staring at a chain of nerves and finding, more or less, that the instructions work. Let me give you a piece of evidence that made me smile when I first turned it over, because it comes at the thing sideways, through memory of all places. Someone took 51 healthy young women and had them breathe deliberately through the left nostril only, and then measured things that the right hemisphere is supposed to be good at. Spatial memory, the ability to hold a shape in the mind, and digit span, that little test where they read you a string of numbers and you try to hold them and say them back, forward and then backward. The scores went up, not by a whisker but plainly. The 4-digit span climbed from about 6 items held to about 8. The backward span, which is harder because you have to juggle the whole string and reverse it, climbed from around 5 to around 7. The spatial memory score rose too, from a little over 5 to over 7. All of it solid enough that chance is a poor explanation. Now these are exactly the kinds of talents the right hemisphere is famous for. So breathing the left nostril, feeding the right hemisphere, seems to leave a fingerprint not only on the heart and the calm, but on the very things that half of the brain does best. The nose reaches all the way into the mind and tilts it. I love that result partly because the people who ran it were so wonderfully candid. They wrote in plain scientific print that the mechanism by which one-sided nostril breathing affects the central nervous system is not clearly understood. That is a beautiful sentence. It means we can measure the effect, we can bet money on the effect, and we still cannot draw you the full wiring diagram without leaving gaps. That is not a failure. That is the honest front edge of knowing something, and we are standing right on it together in the dark. But memory tests, lovely as they are still a bit indirect. If the brain really does quiet down when the left nostril leads, we ought to be able to listen to the brain itself and hear it happen. And we can. We can lay electrodes across the whole scalp and eavesdrop on the electrical chatter of the cortex, the ceaseless flickering hum of billions of cells firing in loose rhythms. So somebody did precisely that. They took 30 people, aged from their 20s into their 50s, and they wired up the head with 64 little listening posts, a whole net of them draped across the scalp, and they had each person breathe through one nostril and then, on another go, through the other. A crossover, they call it, so each person is their own comparison, which is a clean and clever way to run the thing. And what came back through those 64 channels is the kind of result that makes the hair on your arm stand up a little, quietly, in the good way. When the people breathed through the left nostril, the electrical power of the brain went down. Not in one narrow band of rhythm, but across all of them. The slow, deep delta waves, the dreamy theta, the resting alpha, the busy beta, the fast crackling gamma, all of it, every band, quieter. A broad hush fell over the cortex. The brain as a whole instrument turned its volume down, and there rose up toward the back of the head a prominent posterior rhythm, a steady pooling of activity at the rear of the skull that the researchers read as a more restful, more inward, more meditative sort of state. The back of the brain settling into a slow, soft glow while the whole thing dims. Now compare that to what happened when the very same people breathed through the right nostril instead. The hush did not fall the same way. The slow delta band was largely spared, left more active, and the front of the brain, the forward regions we lean on for planning and vigilance and pushing ourselves at a task, showed relatively more activity. A more alert posture, a brain tipped forward, leaning into the world rather than easing back from it. So the two nostrils did not just move the needle by different amounts in the same direction. They pointed the brain in genuinely different attitudes. One inward and dim and posterior and restful, the other forward and alert and frontal. The same skull, the same person, minutes apart, and the only thing that changed was which side of the nose the air came through. Sit with that for a moment. Slow breath in, slow breath out. A column of air, cool and quiet, choosing a side, and the electrical weather of your entire brain rearranging itself in answer. If somebody had told me that as a young man, that I could shift the measurable rhythm of the whole cortex by favoring one nostril, I think I would have wanted to see the apparatus myself. I would have wanted to check the wires, because it sounds like too much for such a small cause. And that is the right instinct, to be suspicious of a large effect from a tiny handle. But the electrodes do not lie easily, and 30 brains bent the same way. And yet, even now, even with the scalp singing its confession through 64 channels, we have not caught the real culprit. Because a broad quieting of the brain, a dimming across every band, that is powerful, but it is also a little too generous. It does not yet tell us why left should differ from both nostrils breathing together, why one open channel should beat two. A dimmer switch that dims everything is not the same as a switch that reaches into one exact circuit. So, we have to go finer. We have to stop asking merely how loud the brain is and start asking how its regions are talking to one another, who is whispering to whom across the falls. And when a newer, sharper set of experiments went looking at exactly that, at the conversation between regions rather than the volume of any one of them, they found something stranger and more specific than a simple hush. They found a pattern with an address on it. So let the breath stay long and easy, and let us go in closer still, down to where the parts of the brain reach across, and hold hands. Picture two people in a crowded room. If you only measure how loud each one is talking, you learn almost nothing about whether they are friends. Two strangers can shout. Two lovers can murmur. Loudness is not intimacy. And so the sharper experiment asked not how loud each patch of brain was, but which patches were murmuring in time with each other, rising and falling together as if they shared a private rhythm. That is what we mean by connectivity. Not the volume of a region, but the coordination between regions. Two places in the brain that oscillate together, up when the other is up, down when the other is down, are in some real sense in conversation. And when a high-density array of electrodes, packed far more thickly than before, listened for that kind of togetherness during left nostril breathing, it caught something with a shape and a location, not just a hush spread thin across the whole head. Here is what it caught. During left-only breathing, there was a rise in what they call alpha connectivity, and it sat in the left back portion of the head, the left posterior region. Alpha is the brain's idling rhythm, roughly the tempo you fall into when your eyes close and nothing urgent is pulling at you. It is, in a rough and useful way, the sound of a region that has been told it may rest. Now the curious part is the side. The airflow was on the left. The somatosensory signal, the feeling of the cool stream landing on the left nasal lining, arrives first on the same side, the left side of the brain. And rather than firing that region up into busy work, the pattern looked inhibitory, a kind of quieting handshake spreading through the left back of the cortex. The touch of the breath did not agitate. It settled. It told a neighborhood of neurons to lower their voices in unison. But that was only the first thing. The second thing is the one I keep turning over in my hands, because it is stranger. Running front to back along the very midline of the brain, along the seam where the two halves meet, there appeared a band of theta connectivity. Theta is slower than alpha, a drowsier, deeper swell, the rhythm of daydream and the edge of sleep, and the inward-turned mind. And this front-to-back theta linkage, this long conversation stretched along the midline from the forehead region back toward the crown, was present during left nostril breathing and simply absent during right. The right nostril did not produce it. That is not a difference of degree. That is a difference of kind. One nostril lights a specific wire along the center of the brain, and the other does not touch it. Now, why should anyone care about a slow rhythm running along the midline? Because that midline corridor, front to back, is roughly where a particular network of the brain lives, the one that hums when you are not focused on the outside world at all, the one that comes alive when you stop doing and start drifting, when you are remembering, imagining, turning inward, resting in yourself. The researchers read that midline theta as a sign that left nostril breathing was selectively engaging exactly that inward, self-referential resting network. Not the whole brain dimmed like a house at bedtime. One particular set of rooms lit gently from within, the rooms you occupy when you let go of the day. So the left nostril was not merely lowering the volume everywhere. It was placing a call, and the call was going to the inward-turning, rest-associated circuitry along a private line the right nostril never dialed. And now, at last, we can walk straight up to the puzzle we started with, the one that has been sitting in the corner watching us this whole time. Why should one nostril beat two? Why should closing off half of your own breathing do more than breathing freely through both? Hold the two pictures side by side. When you breathe through both nostrils at once, air lands on the left lining and the right lining together, more or less balanced. The left flow sends its signal toward one arrangement of brain, the right flow sends its signal toward the other, and these two lateral pushes arrive at roughly the same strength at roughly the same moment. What happens to two equal pushes from opposite sides? They meet in the middle and they cancel. Not violently, not with a bang, just quietly, the way two children pushing on opposite sides of a door leave the door exactly where it was. The signal that reaches the hypothalamus from balanced breathing has no lean to it, no tilt, no address. It says, in effect, all is symmetric. Nothing to lateralize, carry on. And so no focused, one-sided calming trigger ever gets pulled. Force the breath through the left alone, and you break the symmetry on purpose. Now there is a push from one side and nothing to oppose it. The tilt survives. The signal arrives with a lean in it, and that lean is precisely what the machinery downstream is built to read. It concentrates the whole afferent story onto the left lining, which favors the right hemisphere and its rest and restore leanings, and it lights that midline inward network we just watched appear. The very thing that makes bilateral breathing feel natural and complete, its balance, is the thing that erases the signal. Balance is cancellation, and so the answer to the riddle, the reason one open channel can outrun two, is not that you are getting more air or better air. You are getting an asymmetry. You are handing the brain a signal that actually points somewhere, instead of two signals that point in opposite directions and sum to nothing. I want to be honest and say the word we reach for here, the word for cancellation, is a model, a way of talking, and the confidence behind it is not the same iron confidence we had about turbinates swelling or coal receptors firing. This is the softer, more interpretive end of the science, and I will not dress it up as more than it is. But it fits. It fits the loudness data, and it fits the connectivity data. Because notice the odd little detail we brushed past earlier and can now understand. Bilateral alternate breathing actually suppressed the idling rhythms, the alpha and its cousin the mu, more than left only did. By the crude measure of volume, both nostril breathing looked more calming, quieter, more damped, and yet it did not produce that located, one-sided rest network pattern that left only produced. It turned the whole brain down a little further while missing the one circuit that matters. That is the cancellation story wearing its clearest clothes. Broad and balanced dampening from breathing through both. Specific, addressed lateralized engagement from breathing through one. Louder is not the same as aimed. So the brain has cast its vote twice now, once by how much it quiets, and once by which regions it links. But the brain sits at the top of the body, safe in its bone, and I have learned to distrust any calming story that only shows up in the head. If a breath truly reaches down and loosens you, it has to reach the one organ you cannot argue with, the one that keeps its own time whether you approve or not. It has to reach the heart. And the heart, it turns out, keeps a record. Every beat is stamped, and the tiny wobble in the spacing between beats is a confession the heart cannot help making, a readout of which branch of your nervous system currently holds the reins. So let us leave the electrodes on the scalp and follow the wire down into the chest and ask the heart the same question we asked the brain and see whether the two witnesses tell the same tale. They put the sensors on 20 people who had practiced a discipline of breath for years, seasoned practitioners, average age in the middle 40s, the kind of people whose bodies already know the drill and will not be flustered by a laboratory. And they watched two numbers, two ways of measuring that wobble between heartbeats. The first they call by a cluster of letters, and all you need to hold is that a bigger value means a more variable, more supple, more relaxed heart. A heart that is not being held on a tight sympathetic leash. Under left nostril breathing, that first number rose from about 42 to about 78, very nearly doubling. The heart's rhythm loosened, opened, breathed. The second number, which tracks the fast beat-to-beat variation most tightly tied to the calming vagus nerve, climbed from about 34 to about 47. And the plain heart rate, the simple count of beats, drifted down from about 72 to about 69, the body idling lower. Every one of those movements points the same direction, toward the rest and restore branch taking the wheel. Now here is the detail that made me sit up, the detail that ties the chest back to the ancient claim we started with. That fast beat-to-beat number, the vagal one, rose more during left nostril breathing than during right. More. Not merely calm, but comparatively more calm on the left, which is exactly word for word what a tradition with no electrodes and no heart monitors insisted more than 1,000 years ago when it called the left channel the cooling one. The heart, measured in milliseconds by people in white coats, agreed with the Sanskrit adjective. That kind of agreement across such a gulf of centuries is the sort of thing that keeps a curious person awake, or, on a night like this, pleasantly drifting at the very edge of sleep, turning it over. So the brain votes calm, the heart votes calm, the old texts vote calm, and everything is lining up so neatly that you can feel the case closing, which is precisely the moment in any honest investigation when you should start to worry. Because a story this tidy has a way of hiding one stubborn fact that refuses to sit down. And there is such a fact waiting for us, and it says something no one at this point expected to hear. Here it is then. In the year 2024, a small group of investigators ran what they honestly called a pilot. A first look, a toe dipped in the water. 20 people. 8 days of training. Nothing enormous, nothing that settles a science by itself, but real people breathing in a real study, measured honestly. And they did the sensible thing. They asked the people how they felt. Not the electrodes, not the heart monitor, not the milliseconds between one beat and the next. They asked the actual human being sitting in the chair, how calm are you now? How restless? How stirred up inside? And the answer that came back was the answer nobody at the table wanted. The right nostril won. Not by a whisker either. When they measured the change and reported calmness, the right side moved people by nearly 2 points on their little scale, something close to 1.9, while the left side, our hero, the cooling lunar channel, the one the heart and the brain and the ancient texts had all been quietly applauding, moved them by 3/4 of a point. Less than half as much. The nostril we have spent all this time building a case for. The one that lit up the restful posterior rhythm and lifted the vagal tone and dropped the blood pressure. That nostril, when you simply asked a tired person how peaceful they felt, came in second. Now sit with that for a moment, because it is exactly the kind of thing that separates a person who wants a tidy story from a person who wants the truth. It would be so easy, so comfortable to wave this away. To say, well, it was only 20 people, and it was only a pilot, and pilots wander all over the place. And that is fair. It is a small study, and I will not pretend one small study overturns a dozen others. But that is not the interesting part. The interesting part is not whether the result is big. The interesting part is that it points at a crack we walked right past. A crack in the very floor we have been standing on this whole time. And the crack is this. What do we even mean by calm? Because we have been sliding two different things together as though they were one, and they are not one. There is what your body is doing, the machinery of it, the heart slowing, the blood pressure easing, the sweat glands going quiet, the branch of the nervous system that says rest and digest taking the wheel. That is one thing, and it is measurable, and it does not care what you think about it. And then there is what you feel, the private weather inside your skull, the sense of ease or unease that only you have a window onto. And we have been assuming the whole night that these two always march in step, that when the body settles, the feeling settles, and when the feeling settles, the body has settled. But nature made no such promise. Nobody signed that contract. Think of a person who has just finished laughing very hard at something. The heart is pounding, the breath is quick. By every bodily measure, they look stirred up, aroused, switched on. And yet, ask them how they feel, and they will tell you they feel wonderful, loose, at peace, better than they have all day. The machinery says one thing, the feeling says another. Or turn it around. Think of someone lying perfectly still in a dark room, heart slow, breathing shallow and even, a body that on paper looks like the picture of serenity, and inside that quiet body a mind is churning through every worry it owns, going round and round, unable to stop. The instruments would call that person calm. The person would call it torture. So which one is calm? You see the trouble. The word has been doing two jobs, and we never noticed, because most of the time the two jobs agree well enough that we never have to choose. And this same small study, the one that handed the calmness prize to the right nostril, did one more thing that I love, because it is so honest and so revealing. It also measured mind wandering. How much did the mind drift, slip its moorings, float off to yesterday and tomorrow and the thing you forgot to do? And there, on that measure, the left nostril won. The left side, our left side, produced the larger drop in mind wandering. So look at what we actually have. On the right, a bigger report of felt calm. On the left, a mind that stayed more gathered, more present, less scattered. Those are not the same gift. They are two different gifts, handed out by two different sides of the same nose, and if you had only asked one question, you would have crowned the wrong winner and never known it. This is the moment in any real investigation where you have to stop and admit that the question you started with was not sharp enough. We began by asking, which nostril calms you faster? And now the case is forcing a better question out of us, which is, calms which part of you? Because if you mean the heart, and the vessels, and the slow, steady drift of the autonomic dial toward rest, the evidence we have laid out, the heart rate variability climbing, the blood pressure falling in 5 honest minutes, the broad quieting of the cortex, all of that still points at the left. The body's calming, the physiological calming, the kind you can catch in milliseconds and millimeters of mercury, that story holds. But if you mean the felt thing, the warm subjective sense of ease that a person would actually report if you tap them on the shoulder, then the picture goes cloudy, and one small study even flips it around, and we have to be grown up enough to say so out loud. And here is why the two can come apart, which is worth a slow minute, because it is genuinely deep. When you force yourself to breathe through one nostril, gently pinching the other closed, holding a slow count, keeping the rhythm, you are not only nudging your nervous system, you are also giving your attention a job. A small, quiet, repetitive job. And attention is a jealous thing. The moment you hand it a task, even a tiny one, it lets go of some of the churning it was doing a second before. So part of whatever calm a person reports may have nothing to do with the left or the right of it at all. It may come from the simple fact that a restless mind was finally given one small thing to hold, and holding it, stop grabbing at everything else. The nostril you choose may set the tone in the body, while the act of choosing, the focus itself, quiets the mind, and those two effects are riding in the same little boat, and pulling them apart is genuinely hard. That is why I keep coming back in my own head to the instruments over the interview. Not because feelings do not matter, they matter more than almost anything, but because feelings are slippery to measure and easy to fool. Ask a person how calm they feel, and you are also asking, without meaning to, how suggestible are they? How much did they expect this to work? How do they feel about the researcher? Did they sleep well last night? Are they hungry? All of that leaks into the answer. But the heart does not know it is in a study. The heart just beats, and the tiny wobble in the spacing of those beats, the thing the whitecoats call the variability. That wobble tells you, without opinion or flattery, how firmly the resting branch of the nervous system has its hand on the tiller. That is a witness that cannot lie to please you, and that witness, over and over when you concentrate the airflow on the left, leans toward rest. So the stubborn fact does not break our case. That is the thing I want you to carry off towards sleep. It does not break it. It sharpens it. It tells us we were being sloppy with a word, and it hands the word back to us cut into its two true pieces. The body's calm, and the mind's calm, and it says, be careful which one you are talking about. The old yogis, interestingly, may have been talking mostly about the first kind, the cooling of the metabolic fire, the settling of the heat in the body, the pitta they wanted to bring down. That is a bodily claim, a temperature claim, a claim about the furnace, not primarily a claim about how philosophical you feel while you do it. And on that claim, the furnace cooling claim, the modern instruments and the ancient adjective are still shaking hands. But we are not done, because admitting the crack opens a door, and behind that door is a question we have been tiptoeing around for 2 hours now and never quite walked through. If the left nostril really does bend the body toward rest, we still have not honestly explained why left, and only left, and not both together. We gestured at it. We said the signal crosses over. We said the right hemisphere leans toward rest. We said bilateral breathing cancels the imbalance. But saying a thing and understanding a thing are different animals, and I have a nagging feeling we have been reciting the mechanism the way a child recites a poem, correctly, without yet knowing what the words mean. So let us go back down into the machinery one more time, slower now, and ask the rudest possible question of the whole idea. Why should feeding air to one side of your face, rather than the other, reach all the way into the deep old switchboard of the brain and move the dial at all? Because when you really press on it, that is a very strange thing for a nose to be able to do. Start with the rudeness fully out in the open. A nose is a hole. Two holes, really, separated by a thin wall of cartilage and bone. Air goes in, air goes out. From the outside it looks like the least clever part of you, a piece of plumbing, a pair of pipes. And yet here I am telling you that which pipe you happen to be breathing through can nudge your heart, your blood pressure, the electrical weather over your whole scalp. So the honest thing to do is to refuse to be impressed, and instead to ask, brick by brick, how a difference in airflow could possibly become a difference in mood. Where is the wire? Where is the little messenger that runs from the wet inside of your left nostril up to the deep switchboard? Because if we cannot find the wire, then all our fine talk about lunar channels and hemispheres is just poetry with a lab coat on. Here is where we have to be patient, and I mean genuinely patient. The way you are patient with a knot in a shoelace that you will not cut. The wire is the trigeminal nerve. It is the great sensory nerve of the face, the fifth of the cranial nerves, and it carries feeling from your forehead, your cheek, your teeth, and, crucially for us, from the lining inside your nose. When cold air rushes across that wet lining, the lining cools, and there are little molecular gates sitting in the membranes of those trigeminal endings, gates that pop open when they get cold. We have met them already. They go by the name TRPM8. Think of each one as a tiny doorman who only notices the cold. When the moving air steals a little heat from the mucosa, the doorman feels the chill and opens the door, and a pulse of electricity runs up the nerve toward the brain. Now hold that picture, because everything hinges on one word, and the word is more. The open nostril, the one your body has decongested, lets more air through. More air means more cooling. More cooling means more of those cold doormen throwing open their doors. So the open side is not just breathing more air, it is shouting more loudly up the trigeminal nerve. And the closed side, the swollen side, the side where the erectile tissue has quietly engorged and narrowed the passage, that side is whispering. The two nostrils are not equal partners sending the same telegram. One is loud and one is soft. And the brain, up in its dark room, is reading the difference between the two voices. That is the thing I want you to feel tonight, lying there in the dark. The brain does not really care about air. Air is the messenger, not the message. What the brain is listening to is a pattern of nerve firing, a lopsided chorus, louder on one side of the face than the other, and a lopsided chorus is exactly what an asymmetry detecting machine loves to eat. Your nervous system is, above almost everything else, a comparison engine. It is forever asking, is this side more than that side? Is now more than a moment ago? Is here brighter, warmer, louder than there? Give it a balanced signal and it shrugs. Give it an imbalance and it leans. So walk the messenger the rest of the way in. The trigeminal signal from the left side of the nose runs up on the left and it feeds into the brainstem and up toward the hypothalamus on the same side it came from. Ipsilateral, the anatomists say, meaning it keeps to its own side of the house rather than crossing the hallway. And the hypothalamus is not some remote committee. It is the master dial for the whole automatic body, the thermostat and the tempo keeper and the traffic officer for the two great branches of the involuntary nervous system, the branch that revs you up and the branch that settles you down. When one side of that structure is being fed a louder stream of chatter from one side of the face, the two hemispheres above it do not respond in perfect mirror. One gets, on balance, a little more stirred, and the pattern of who leans toward the calming branch and who leans toward the rousing branch tips, gently to one side. And here is the piece that stops me every time, because it is so easy to say and so hard to truly hold. Feeding the left nostril tends to raise activity, on balance, in the right hemisphere. Feeding the right nostril tends to raise it in the left. It is a crossing over, the way so much of the body crosses over, your right hand governed from the left side of your head and the reverse. We are, in a plain anatomical sense, wired in a knot. And the right hemisphere, in study after study, leans a little toward the settling branch, the rest and digest branch, while the left leans a little toward the rousing branch. I want to be careful and fair here. This lopsidedness of the hemispheres is not a clean law like gravity. It is a tendency, argued over, measured with scatter, true on average across many people, and not a promise about any one skull. But it is measured, and it points the same way the old yogis pointed, which is a coincidence worth staying suspicious of. Now we can finally, honestly, walk up to the question we kept dodging. Why not both? If left feeds the calming side, why not open both nostrils wide, breathe slow and deep through the pair of them, and get a double helping of settling? It sounds obvious. It sounds almost greedy in its good sense. And it is wrong, and the reason it is wrong is the loveliest part of the whole night. Picture the comparison engine again. When you breathe equally through both nostrils, both sides of your face are singing to it at the same volume. The left chorus and the right chorus are matched. And when you subtract one from the other, the way the nervous system is forever quietly subtracting, you get nothing. Zero. A balanced signal. There is no lopsidedness for the leaning machine to lean on. Both hemispheres get roused a little, more or less together, and the specific focused tilt toward the resting branch never gets built, because building it required an imbalance, and you have just carefully canceled the imbalance out. You did not add two calming signals together. You erased the one asymmetry that was doing the work. This is a general truth about nervous systems, and it goes far past the nose, so let it sink in as you drift. A great deal of what a brain knows, it knows by difference, not by amount. Two eyes give you depth not because they gather twice the light, but because they disagree slightly about where things are, and the disagreement is the depth. Two ears place a sound in the room because one hears it a hair sooner and a touch louder than the other, and the mismatch is the map. Cancel the difference, and you do not double the information. You blind the sense. The nose tonight is playing the same game. One loud nostril and one soft nostril is a stereo signal. Two equal nostrils is mono, and mono cannot tell the brainstem which way to tip. So the strange power of the single slow breath through the left side is not that it delivers something extra. It is that it refuses to be symmetric. It deliberately unbalances the chorus, holds the imbalance steady, breath after breath, and gives the leaning machine a clear and unwavering direction to lean. Both together would have been the sensible sounding thing, and the sensible sounding thing would have washed the signal out to gray. The tradition that said left, and only left and not both, was pointing straight at the one thing the physiology says actually carries the message. An asymmetry, sustained on purpose. And there is a second gift folded inside the first, which is that the imbalance you create by breathing left is exactly the kind of imbalance you could also create by lying down a certain way. We touched this earlier, and I want to return to it now with the mechanism in hand, because now it is not a curiosity, it is a consequence. Lie on your right side, the weight of your body pressing that flank against the mattress, and over some minutes the right nostril tends to congest and the left to open. The erectile tissue answers to posture, which means the very act of settling onto your right side to sleep is, without any effort or counting or technique at all, gently steering airflow toward the left and steering the chorus toward the lopsided pattern that tips you toward rest. The old instruction to lie on your right side to quiet down was not superstition. It was someone, long ago, noticing an effect and remembering it, without any idea of the cold doormen or the crossing wires underneath. I find that humbling, and I want to leave you inside that humility for a moment before we go on. People with no microscopes, no electrodes, no word for a nerve, sat with their own breath for years at a time, and by sheer patient attention they found a lever that we are only now, with all our instruments, able to see the pulleys behind. They were wrong about a great many things, and I would not trade one honest measurement for a shelf of their metaphysics. But on this small specific point, the asymmetry, the left, the not both, they had their hand on the real lever. And the fact that a lever can be found by feeling in the dark, long before it can be explained in the light, is one of the quietly astonishing things about being a creature that pays attention to itself. So we have our wire at last. Cold air, cold doorman, a louder chorus on the open side, an ipsilateral run to the master dial, a crossing over to the hemisphere that leans toward rest, and above all an imbalance that both together would have quietly erased. That is the machine. But a machine, once you understand it, always coughs up a new question, and this one has been forming at the back of my mind for a while now, and it is this. If the effect is really about difference, about lopsidedness, then it should not matter only which nostril, but how slowly, and how the difference is held over time. Let me hold that question up to the light for a while, because it is a good one, and good questions deserve to be turned over slowly, the way you turn a stone you found in a river to see which side has the moss. If the whole trick is difference, then difference has a rhythm, and rhythm has a speed, and speed is something we can play with. So let us play. Here is a number that the body seems to care about more than almost any other when it comes to calming itself. 6 breaths in 1 minute. Not a mystical number, not a number somebody chose because it sounded pretty. It falls out of the plumbing. Your blood pressure and your heart rate are not steady little soldiers marching in place. They sway. They rise and fall in slow waves all on their own, and those waves have a natural period of roughly 10 seconds, which is to say they complete about 6 full swings in a minute. When you breathe at that same pace, 1 breath every 10 seconds, your breathing wave and your blood pressure wave line up like 2 children on neighboring swings who have found the same tempo, and each push adds to the other. Physicists have a word for that lining up. We call it resonance. And it is the same reason a small push on a swing at just the right moment sends the child higher and higher, while 100 badly timed shoves do nothing. Now what does resonance do inside you? It swells the size of a beautiful little effect that has a clumsy name: respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Strip the Latin off it, and it means something simple. Your heart speeds up a touch when you breathe in, and slows down a touch when you breathe out. Everybody's heart does this, though most people never feel it. And here is the piece that matters for tonight. The slowing on the out-breath is the fingerprint of the vagus nerve, that long wandering 10th cranial nerve that reaches down from the brainstem into the chest and lays a gentle hand on the pacemaker of the heart. On every unhurried exhale, stretch receptors in the lungs report in, the vagus tightens its grip a little, and the heart eases off. The longer and the slower the exhale, the firmer that vagal break. So slow breathing all by itself with no talk of nostrils at all is genuinely powerful. It is not folklore. It is a lever you can lay your hand on tonight and feel move. And this is exactly where an honest investigator has to get suspicious of his own favorite theory. Because look at what the calming protocols actually do. Take the one they ran on those 22 patients with high blood pressure, the ones whose mean age was around 58. 27 rounds of breathing through the left nostril only at that magic pace of 6 breaths a minute, a slow count of 5 drawn in and a slow count of 5 let out. About 5 minutes of it. And afterward, measured on the spot, their heart rate had dropped, their upper blood pressure number had dropped, their pulse pressure had dropped, and a quantity called the rate pressure product, which is a decent stand-in for how hard the heart is working, had dropped too. Real numbers, moving in the calm direction in 5 minutes. A lovely result. But notice the trap sitting right inside it. That protocol did 2 things at once. It sent the air through the left side and it slowed everything to the resonance pace. 2 levers pulled together. So when the person grows calm, which lever did the pulling? The nostril, or just the slowness that any slow breath would have delivered? This is the sort of tangle that ruins a detective who has fallen in love with his suspect. You want it to be the nostril. You have built this whole beautiful story about cold doormen and crossing wires in hemispheres that lean toward rest. And now a plainer, humbler explanation walks into the room and says, maybe it was just the slowness the whole time, and the left nostril was along for the ride. You have to take that plainer explanation seriously. You have to try to convict your own theory of being unnecessary. That is the only honest way to do this. So how would you tell the 2 apart? You would need to hold the slowness fixed and change only the geometry of the air. Same 6 breaths a minute, same long exhale, same vagal break for everybody, and then send the air one way for one group and another way for another group and see if anything is left over that slowness cannot account for. And, wonderfully, that is more or less the shape of the experiments that people went and did. They compared left only, right only, and both together all breathed slowly and carefully. If slowness were the whole story, the 3 ways of doing it should have blurred into one another. The brain and the heart should not have been able to tell which door the air came through, only how gently it came. But they could tell. That is the thing. That is the crack through which the light gets in. When people breathe slowly through both nostrils at once, the balanced way, they got calming, yes, and by some coarse measures, they even got more of a certain kind of cortical quieting. The alternate, both sides breathing, pressed down harder on one band of brain rhythm than the left-only breathing did. If you were grading on that single measure alone, you might hand the prize to both together and go home. And yet both together did not lay down the particular localized pattern that the left-only breathing did. It flooded the whole hall with dimmer light instead of lighting one specific lamp. The slowness was shared by all 3. Something beyond the slowness was not. So the resonance, the 6 breaths a minute, the vagal break, all of it turns out to be real and important and not the answer to our specific riddle. It is the stage, not the play. It is the reason any slow breathing soothes you at all, and you should use it tonight, whether or not you bother with the nostril. But it cannot be why the left alone does something the 2 together cannot. Slowness is symmetric. It arrives on both sides equally. And a symmetric cause cannot explain an asymmetric result. That little sentence is worth carrying to sleep with you, because it is one of the sturdiest tools in all of physics. Whenever you find a lopsided effect, go looking for a lopsided cause. Do not accept an even, balanced, both-sided explanation for something that leans. The leaning has to come from somewhere. Which drags us back, a little sheepishly, to the geometry of the air, to how the difference is held. And now I want to press on the second half of that question I raised, the part about time, because it changes the flavor of the whole thing. It is not enough to make one side louder than the other for a single breath. A single lopsided breath is a whisper the brain can ignore. The doormen of the autonomic system are not tripped by one cold gust. They lean the way you lean on a fence, gradually giving it time to hold. What the calming protocols really do is take that lopsidedness, the concentrated cold chorus on the open left side, and hold it steady for minutes, breath after breath after breath, all at the same slow tempo, so that the master dial in the hypothalamus stops treating it as noise and starts treating it as a standing instruction. Difference, sustained, becomes a message. Difference, sustained and slow, becomes a message the resting branch of your nervous system actually acts upon. And here the ordinary nasal cycle, the one we started with, suddenly looks less like an unrelated curiosity and more like the body already knowing this trick without being told. Remember, all on its own, hour after hour, your nose is holding one side more open than the other, and it holds each side open not for a second, but for a couple of hours at a stretch, and it drifts in the population toward holding the left side open for a little longer than the right. Your body, when nobody is forcing it to do anything, spends slightly more of its life sending the concentrated air through the very door that leans toward rest, and it holds that door open long enough for the message to land. The technique we have been chasing all night is not some strange imposition on the body. It is a deliberate, wide-awake version of a lopsidedness the body was already quietly practicing in its sleep. So the shape of our answer is sharpening. It is not the resistance of the narrow valve, though that is real. It is not the slowness of the resonant breath, though that is real and powerful. It is a difference between the two sides, concentrated rather than balanced, aimed at the left rather than the right, and above all sustained in time rather than flickering. Take away the sustaining and you have a whisper. Take away the aim and you have noise. Take away the difference and, breathing evenly through both, you have cancelled the very thing that carried the signal. 3 conditions, all of them necessary, none of them sufficient alone. That is usually the sign in this business that you are finally standing near the truth. Nature rarely hands you a single tidy cause. She hands you a conspiracy of conditions that must all be present at once, and the pleasure of the work is finding out which ones they are and which impostors you can send home. We have sent a few impostors home tonight, but there is still one member of the conspiracy we have barely questioned, the strangest one, the one that decides why the left door and the right door lead to such different rooms inside the skull. So let us finally sit down with that last suspect. He has been waiting quietly at the edge of the room this whole time, and he is the one who makes the whole story strange. Here is the thing that ought to bother you. The nose is right there in the middle of your face, more or less symmetric, 2 openings a thumb's width apart. Why on earth should it matter which one you breathe through? Air is air. Oxygen does not carry a little flag telling your blood which door it came in by. And yet the body treats these 2 nearby doors as if they opened onto completely different countries. To understand that, we have to follow the signal patiently from the wet lining of the nose all the way up into the folded gray country of the brain, and watch where it goes. Start with what happens when cool air slides past the left nostril. We already met the little cold sensing gates, the ones that open when the lining chills, sitting on the endings of that big facial nerve. When you breathe through the left side, those gates fire on the left. The message they send does something that, the first time you hear it, sounds almost too simple to be important. It stays on the same side. It does not cross over. It runs up, ipsilateral is the word the anatomists use, meaning same side, into the deep switchboard at the base of the brain, that little commander we keep coming back to, the hypothalamus. So a left nostril signal arrives at the left of the switchboard. A right nostril signal arrives at the right. So far, nothing mysterious. The mystery is what the switchboard does next. Because the brain, for reasons that go back hundreds of millions of years, is a crossed machine. Almost everything about it is wired in reverse. Your right hand is run by the left side of your brain, your left hand by the right side. The left half of everything you see lands on the right side of your visual cortex. This crossing over is one of the oldest and oddest facts about animals with backbones, and nobody is entirely sure why nature settled on it. Only that she did, again and again, and stuck with it. So when that same side signal reaches the hypothalamus and gets passed upward and outward into the great wrinkled sheet of the cortex, the crossing takes over. The left nostril, having sent its message up the left side, ends up preferentially waking the right hemisphere, and the right nostril, in the mirror image, ends up leaning on the left hemisphere. The two nearby doors open onto opposite houses after all, because the hallway between them crosses in the middle. Now hold that, and let me add the piece that turns a curiosity into a reason. The two halves of the brain are not identical twins doing the same job. They lean. They specialize. And here is the lean that matters for us tonight. The right hemisphere, the one the left nostril wakes, tends to sit closer to the calming branch of the nervous system, the rest and digest side, the branch that slows the heart and loosens the shoulders and lets the belly soften. The left hemisphere, which the right nostril wakes, tends to sit closer to the rousing branch, the fight or flight side, the one that speeds you up and sharpens you and gets you ready to do something. I want to be honest with you, the way an honest investigator has to be. This left brain, right brain business has been badly abused out in the world. People have hung all sorts of nonsense on it, that one side is logical and the other artistic, and most of that is fairy tale. So I am not asking you to believe the fairy tale. I am telling you something narrower and better supported, that when you look specifically at the automatic controls of the body, the heartbeat and the blood vessels and the gut, there does seem to be a real measurable tilt. The right hemisphere leaning toward the brake, the left toward the accelerator. It is a tilt, not a wall. But a tilt is all you need to explain a preference. Put the two facts side by side, and the strangeness dissolves into something almost elegant. Breathe through the left nostril. The cold signal runs up the left. The crossing hands it to the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere leans toward the brake, and so, one slow breath at a time, you are quietly pressing on the calming pedal of your own nervous system, using nothing but the choice of which door to open. The yogis who called the left channel the moon channel, the cooling one, the one you use to come down, they had no idea about crossed nerve fibers or hemispheres. They could not have, but they had noticed the effect, and they had named it correctly, and they had aimed it at the right door. That is the thing that keeps astonishing me in this whole affair. They got the direction right. Now, I can hear the careful part of your mind objecting, and good, it should. You are thinking, this is a lovely story. But a story is not a proof. A crossed wire and a leaning hemisphere drawn as a tidy diagram will explain almost anything you please after the fact. How do we know the signal actually goes where the diagram says? How do we know the right hemisphere actually wakes up when the left nostril breathes? This is exactly the right suspicion, and it is the suspicion that separates a fireside tale from a piece of science. So let us not take the diagram's word for it. Let us go and look inside a living head while it breathes, and see whether the electricity itself takes sides. There is a way to do that, gently, without opening anything. You lay a net of little metal buttons over the whole scalp, dozens of them, and each one listens to the faint electrical hum of the brain underneath. 64 of them in one of these studies, spread from forehead to the back of the skull. You sit a person down, 30 of them across a good range of ages, and you have each one breathe through one nostril, then the other, so that every person is their own comparison. And then you simply listen to the hum, and you ask, does it change? And where? What they found is the kind of result that makes the hair on your arm stand up a little, because it is so specific. When the person breathed through the left nostril, the electrical power of the brain went down. Not in one narrow band of rhythm, but across all of them. The slow deep waves and the middle waves and the fast crackling ones, all quieter. The whole cortex, in a sense, lowered its voice, and the quieting was strongest toward the back of the head, a prominent rhythm settling over the rear of the brain, the kind of pattern that people who study meditation and rest have learned to recognize as a restful, inward, restorative state. The brain was not doing less because it was bored. It was doing less in the particular way a brain does when it stops bracing. And the right nostril? Nearly the mirror image, just as the cross diagram would have predicted. Breathing through the right side did not hush the deepest slow waves the same way, and it left the front of the brain, the busy planning forward part, relatively more lit up, more forward-leaning, more alert. One door leads toward the quiet back rooms. The other keeps the lights on in the front office. Two nostrils are thumbs width apart, and the electricity itself, measured through the bone, sorts them into two different states of mind. That is not a diagram anymore. That is the thing happening, caught in the act. I want you to sit with how peculiar and how beautiful that is, because it is easy to rush past. There is no drug here. Nothing was swallowed, nothing injected, nothing switched on. A person simply covered one side of their nose and breathed slowly through the other, and the collective electrical behavior of some tens of billions of nerve cells shifted in a direction you could see on a chart. The lever was always there. It was sitting in the middle of your face the whole time, and almost nobody ever thinks to pull it, because who would guess that so small and so ordinary an act, choosing a nostril, reaches so far inward? But you know me by now. One study, however pretty, is a single witness, and a single witness can be mistaken or unlucky. Before we let ourselves believe that the back of the brain really goes quiet on the left and the front stays lit on the right, we want to know whether a finer instrument, aimed more carefully, sees the same thing, and sees something the cross diagram did not even ask for. Because the deepest confirmations in this business are not when nature gives you the answer you expected. They are when she hands you a second answer you never thought to look for, and it turns out to fit the first one like a key you did not know you were carving. And that is precisely what a sharper look at the electricity, band by band and region by region, was about to reveal. So picture a different room now, a quieter one, with a cap of many small electrodes pressed gently to the scalp, far more of them than before, packed close together so that instead of a rough sketch of where the electricity lives, you get something more like a fine photograph. The people running this look are not content to say the back of the head hummed and the front stayed busy. They want to know how the regions talk to one another. Not just how loud each patch of cortex is, but who is whispering to whom, and in what rhythm, and whether the conversation changes when you close down the right side of your nose and breathe only through the left. And here is the first thing they find, and I want you to sit with it, because it is delicate and easy to rush past. When a person breathes through the left nostril alone, there is a rise in a particular kind of coordination, in the alpha rhythm, the slow, easy rolling wave that shows up when a piece of the brain is idling, resting, not being driven hard. And this rise in alpha coordination is concentrated in the back left of the head, the left posterior region. Now stop and think about that, because it is a little strange. The air is going in the left nostril. The signal, we said, wanders up to the hypothalamus on its own side, the left side, and from there the strongest effect crosses over to light up the right hemisphere. So why is a piece of the left side of the brain now singing this quiet resting song? The people who did the work have a reading of it, and it is a lovely one. When a region of the brain shows this idling alpha rhythm, that is very often not the region falling asleep at its post. It is the region being told, gently, to hush. Alpha can be the sound of inhibition, of a part of the cortex being asked to step back and stop shouting so the rest can be heard. The touch and the airflow are being felt on the left side of the nasal lining, and that steady stream of sensation appears to quiet the patch of brain nearest to it on its own side. So one side gets a firm quieting, while the crossed pathway to the far hemisphere carries the other half of the story. You are getting two effects at once from the same slow river of air, and they do not fight. They fit. But that was not even the part that made me lean in. The final look found a second thing, and this second thing was not something the earlier, cruder picture had thought to ask about at all. Running down the very middle of the head, front to back, along the seam where the two hemispheres meet, there appeared a strong coordination in the theta rhythm. Theta is slower still than alpha, a deep, unhurried pulse, the kind of wave you meet in daydreaming, in memory drifting loose, in the mind turning inward and wandering its own halls. And this front-to-back, midline theta conversation showed up during left nostril breathing and was simply absent when the same people breathed through the right nostril instead. Absent, not weaker, not there. Now what lives along that front-to-back midline, quietly talking to itself when a person stops attending to the outside world? There is a network the brain runs when you are not doing anything in particular, when you let go of the task in front of you and your thoughts turn to nowhere and everywhere. It is the pattern of the resting mind, the mind wandering off the leash, the mind that comes on precisely when you stop clenching it around a problem. And here was left nostril breathing, apparently reaching in and switching that inward turn pattern on, in a way that ordinary right nostril breathing did not. So it is not merely that the left nostril calms the body through the heart and the wandering nerve. It seems also to tilt the whole style of the mind toward the inward, drifting, unclenched setting. The setting you would want, say, if you were lying in the dark, hoping to let the day dissolve and fall away into sleep. I have to be honest with you about how much I love a result like that, because it is exactly the shape of the thing you should trust more, not less. When you go looking for confirmation and you find only the very thing you predicted, you should always keep one eyebrow raised, because it is terribly easy to find what you already believe. But when the finer instrument hands you back your prediction and then adds a whole second phenomenon you never ordered, sitting right down the midline, pointing at the resting mind, and it turns out to agree with everything else, with the slowing heart and the cooling channel and the quieted back of the head, then you begin to feel that you are not fooling yourself. You are being shown a real piece of how the machine is wired. And now we come to the hinge of the whole investigation, the question that has been waiting patiently in the corner this entire time. We have been asking why the left, and we have found the crossroads and the quieted regions and the drifting midline. But the title of our little mystery made a sharper claim than that. It said the left alone does more than both together. Not just that the left does something, that closing one nostril beats using two. And you would think, wouldn't you, that two nostrils must be better than one. More air, more sensation, more of everything reaching the brain. Surely doubling the input doubles the effect. So they tested it. In that same fine-grained look, they did not only compare left against right, they put in a third way of breathing, the alternating way, the balanced way, where you take the air through both sides in turn, the way the old practices braid the two channels together. And they watched what it did to the brain. And here is where the ordinary expectation quietly falls on its face. The balanced two-sided breathing was not weak. In one measure, it was actually stronger. It pressed down the idling rhythms, the alpha and its cousin, even harder than left-only breathing did. If you had only that one dial to read, you would declare the balanced way the winner and go home. But the balanced breathing did not produce the localized pattern. It pushed everything down broadly, like a hand laid flat across all the piano keys at once, but it did not play the particular chord. It did not give you the concentrated quieting at the back left. It did not light the front-to-back midline theta and call up the wandering resting mind. It activated widely and specifically nothing. And that, at last, is the crack through which the real answer shines, and it is subtler and far more beautiful than more air, more calm. Think about what balance actually means for a signal. When the air runs equally through both nostrils, the left lining sends its stream of sensation up the left side, and the right lining sends its matching stream up the right side, and the two arrive at the hypothalamus at the same strength, at the same moment, pulling in opposite directions. Left airflow would tilt you toward the right hemisphere and its restful branch. Right airflow would tilt you toward the left hemisphere and its rousing branch. And when both push at once evenly, what is the tilt? There is none. The two lateral signals meet in the middle and cancel. You are left with a symmetric wash, a balanced hum with no direction in it, no side chosen, no lever pulled. The brain gets plenty of breathing, plenty of the good slow rhythm at the resonant pace, and that alone is worth a great deal. But it does not get the one thing that only asymmetry can give. It does not get a side. This is one of those places where nature turns out to care not about how much, but about the difference. The information that steers the autonomic branches is not carried in the total amount of air. It is carried in the imbalance between the two sides. A left that is louder than the right is a message. A right louder than the left is the opposite message. But a left exactly equal to the right is not a quieter message or a louder message. It is no message at all on that particular channel. It is silence in the language of sidedness. So the person breathing carefully through both nostrils, feeling very virtuous about being balanced, has unknowingly whited out the very signal they were hoping to send. They have shouted so evenly that the shout has no shape. And the poor left nostril, closed off and lonely, doing only half the breathing, turns out to be sending the clearest possible telegram. One side, loud. The other, dark. Maximum imbalance. Maximum tilt. The lever pulled all the way over toward the resting hemisphere, the cooling channel, the quiet back of the head, the drifting midline. Less air. More message. That is the resolution of the paradox in the title, and it is exactly the sort of joke nature likes to play on our common sense. We assume that to do more we must add more. And here the trick is to take something away, to close one door, precisely so that the other door can be heard. But I do not want you to think we have wrapped it all up in a neat parcel, because a good detective, having caught the pattern, immediately grows suspicious of how tidy it has become. We have the crossed roads. We have the cancellation. We have the fine electrical portrait agreeing with the slowing heart. It all lines up so nicely that I trust it, and precisely because I trust it, I now want to know where it breaks. Because somewhere out there is a study that refused to behave, that ran the experiment and got the wrong nostril winning, and until we have looked that troublemaker square in the eye, we have not really earned our answer. So let me bring that troublemaker into the room, because it deserves a fair hearing and not a quick dismissal. In the year 2024, a small trial was run. Only 20 people, trained over 8 days. And when the researchers asked the people afterward how calm they felt, how settled, how free of that itchy restlessness, the answer came back the wrong way round. The folks doing right nostril breathing reported the bigger drop in stress. Their calmness score climbed by nearly 2 whole points. 1.91 if you want the exact figure, while the left nostril group reported a gain of only 3/4 of a point, 0.75. Now, if you have been walking beside me this whole way, nodding along as the crossed roads and the quieting cortex and the slowing heart all pointed left, this ought to feel like a small betrayal. The left nostril was supposed to be the cooling one, the moon channel, the soft door, and here are 20 people telling us in plain words that the right door soothed them more. A weak detective panics at a moment like this. He either throws out the study he doesn't like, or he throws out the whole theory he spent an hour building. Neither move is honest. The better move is slower. We sit with the contradiction and we ask a simple question. What exactly did we measure in each case? Because that is almost always where these puzzles hide their answer. When the heart rate people measured calm, they did not ask anyone how they felt. They watched the beat-to-beat spacing of the heartbeat. They watched the vagus nerve tug on the pacemaker. They read a number off the body that the body cannot fake and does not know how to lie about. But when the 20-person trial measured calm, it asked. It handed a person a scale and said, "Tell me, on the whole, how do you feel?" And a person answering that question is doing something enormously more complicated than a heart obeying a nerve. Think about what happens when you ask someone how relaxed they are. They have to turn their attention inward. They have to notice their own state, put words to it, compare it against some private memory of other days, and then hand you a tidy little rating. That whole act, that turning of the mind's eye upon itself, is a busy, verbal, effortful thing. And remember what we said about the right nostril. Air through the right side leans on the left hemisphere, the side that loves words, that loves order, that loves to name and rank and compare. It may well be that right nostril breathing does not make you more relaxed underneath, but it makes you more able to sit down and produce a confident report about your relaxation. It sharpens the very machinery you use to answer the question. So the answer comes out crisp and high, not because the sea was calmer, but because the instrument reading the sea was steadier and more articulate. And there is a matching clue tucked into that same little study, one that keeps the left nostril from losing the argument. Even though the right nostril people said they felt calmer, the left nostril people showed the larger drop in something else. Their minds wandered less. That drifting, that gentle unmooring where the thoughts slipped their leash and flowed off, that quieted more on the left. Which is a beautiful thing to notice, because mind wandering is close cousin to the very network the electrodes lit up earlier. That midline hum running front to back that we tied to the brain's resting inward default state. So the left nostril was not failing to calm anyone. It was doing something the questionnaire was simply too blunt to catch. It was loosening the grip of the wandering, ruminating mind, which is exactly the thing that keeps a tired person awake at night, and yet it is a change you feel less as an opinion and more as an absence. The absence of the treadmill of thought. This is the oldest trap in all of measurement, and I want you to feel how deep it goes, because it is not a fact about noses at all. It is a fact about knowing anything. When you ask a person to be both the ocean and the instrument that measures the ocean, you get a tangled answer. The measuring interferes with the thing measured. We meet this everywhere in physics. This business of the observer disturbing the observed, and here it wears a very human face. The quiet mind is precisely the mind least interested in filling out a form about how quiet it is. The busy verbal mind is precisely the one most eager to declare, loudly and clearly, that everything is fine. So the self-report can point one way while the vagus nerve and the pacemaker point the other, and both can be telling the truth about different things. That is why all through this investigation I have leaned so hard on the measures the body cannot argue with. The spacing of heartbeats, the electrical tone of the scalp, the number on the blood pressure cuff. Recall those career practitioners, the 20 of them, average age in the mid-40s, sitting quietly with the heart monitors on. The left nostril breathing pushed one of their variability numbers, the one called SDNN, from about 42 milliseconds all the way up past 77. It nearly doubled. And the beat-to-beat number, RMSSD, the one most tightly tied to the vagus nerve itself, climbed from 34 up to 47, and it climbed more on the left than on the right. The heart rate itself drifted gently down, from around 72 beats a minute to a little over 69. Nobody asked those hearts how they felt. The hearts simply slowed, because a nerve told them to, and that nerve does not care what story the mind would like to tell afterward. And then the larger trial, the 106 young people, breathing the slow way 3/4 of an hour a day for 2 weeks. There the numbers marched down like soldiers. The top blood pressure figure fell better than 10 points, from around 127 down to 116. The bottom figure fell 5.5. The pulse eased off by 3 or 4 beats a minute. And here is the part I love most, because it goes past the plumbing and into the mind's own speed. They measured reaction time, how fast a person can answer a sound or a flash of light. The time to react to a sound dropped by more than 20 milliseconds, from 164 down to 144. The time to react to a sight dropped by more than 26, from 190 down to 164. Now sit with the strangeness of that. We have been calling this the calming nostril, the sleepy door, and yet the calm nervous system did not get sluggish. It got quicker. It got cleaner. The settling of the storm did not dull the person. It uncluttered them. That surprised me the first time I turned it over, and I want you to feel that surprise too, softly, the way you notice a light left on in another room. We carry this lazy assumption that calm and sharp sit at opposite ends of a single stick, so that to gain one you must spend the other. Relaxed means dopey. Alert means tense. But the body keeps refusing to honor that stick. The parasympathetic state, the rest and digest state, is not the state of a person half asleep at the wheel. It is the state of a cat lying utterly still in the grass, heartbeat slow, muscles loose, and every whisker tuned to the smallest movement. Rest is not the opposite of readiness. Sometimes rest is the cleanest form of readiness there is, because a nervous system that is not busy bracing against an imaginary threat has all its attention free to spend on the real world in front of it. So the troublemaker study did not break our answer. It sharpened it. It taught us to distrust the mind's press release and to trust the body's ledger. It taught us that left nostril breathing may quiet the ruminating machinery so gently that the owner barely files a report about it, while the heart and the scalp and the cuff record the change in ink that will not wash out. And it left us with that lovely little scandal about reaction time, the calming door that somehow makes you faster, which I am not going to tie off neatly just yet, because it opens onto something bigger about what we even mean when we say a nervous system is relaxed. There is a difference, you see, between the piece of shutting down and the piece of coming into balance, and only one of those two pieces makes you quicker. We have been assuming this whole time that we knew which one we were building toward. I am no longer certain we did. And before I can tell you where the sleep actually comes from, the real sleep, the deep kind, I have to take you back to that strange asymmetry between the two halves of the brain and ask a question I have been carefully avoiding all night. Why should the right side of the head, of all things, be the restful side at all? So let me sit with that question a while, because it is a good one and it deserves patience. Why the right side? Not the left, the right. When I first met this idea, I distrusted it, and I will tell you plainly why. The brain looks, from the outside, almost perfectly symmetric. Two hemispheres, roughly mirror images, a great bundle of fibers stitching them down the middle, and yet nature, when it is being careful about something, is almost never symmetric. Your heart sits a little to the left, your liver hogs the right, the way you fold your hands, the way a seashell coils, the very molecules of your body, all of them pick a side. So when someone tells me the two halves of the head do slightly different jobs, my suspicion is not that this is too strange to be true. My suspicion is the opposite. It would be stranger if they were identical. Now, the careful thing to say, and I want to be careful here because this is a place where people love to talk nonsense, is that the popular business about one side being the logical side and the other side being the artistic side is mostly rubbish. It has been oversold in the worst way. But underneath the rubbish there is a real and much quieter asymmetry, and it is not about poetry versus arithmetic. It is about the body. It is about which half of the head keeps a closer watch on the slow humming housekeeping machinery of you. The heartbeat, the gut, the width of the blood vessels, the breath. And the evidence, imperfect and contested as it is, keeps pointing the same way. The right hemisphere seems to lean toward the calming branch, the rest and digest branch, the parasympathetic, and the left hemisphere leans toward the rousing branch, the fight and flight branch, the sympathetic. Lean, I said. Not rule, not own. Lean. Here is the piece that made me stop believing it. Remember the cold receptors, the little channels on the trigeminal nerve that fire when air cools the lining of the nose. When you breathe through your left nostril, that stream of cooling, that patter of signals, goes up on the same side it came in. It does not immediately cross over. It climbs to the hypothalamus on the left, and from there the influence spreads, and the hemisphere that gets the largest share of the stirring is the one on the opposite side. Left air, right brain. It is the same crossing you already half know about from your hands. The right hand answers to the left hemisphere, the left hand to the right. The body wires itself in a great gentle X, and the nose, it turns out, is no exception to the crossing. So follow the chain, link by link, slowly, the way you would follow a thread through a dark house with your fingers. You breathe in through the left nostril. The cool air wakes the cold channels on the left. The signal rides up the left trigeminal road to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus tips its influence toward the right hemisphere. And the right hemisphere, leaning as it does toward the calming branch, quietly lets out a little more of the rest and digest tone through the body. That is the whole machine. That is the argument in one breath. It is a beautiful chain because every single link in it is something we can measure. The cold channel is real. The crossing is real. The lean is at least well supported. And when you put the electrodes on and watch, the chain does not stay a story. It shows up in the numbers. But I promised you a scandal. And I am a man who keeps his promises even when it costs me the tidy ending. Because there was a study, a small one, a careful little pilot with 20 people trained over 8 days, and it went and did the rudest possible thing to my lovely chain. It found that the right nostril, the rousing one, the one that ought by all my talk to wind you up, produced the bigger drop in reported stress and restlessness. The calmness score moved by nearly 2 full points on the right and barely 3/4 of a point on the left. Now what am I to do with that? I have spent half the night building you a cathedral for the left nostril, and here is the right nostril walking off with the prize for calm. I will tell you exactly what I do with it, because this is the part of science that nobody puts on the posters. I do not throw the cathedral away. And I do not throw the rude result away either. I hold both, and I ask what the disagreement is trying to teach me. And the lesson, when I finally saw it, was about the difference between two things I had been lazily calling by one name: There is what your heart does, and there is what your mouth says your heart is doing. These are not the same measurement. When you strap on the heart rate variability electrodes and watch the vagus nerve lengthen the space between beats, you are measuring the body itself, directly, with no opinion in the way. When you ask a person after 8 days how calm do you feel, on a scale you are measuring something real too. But it is filtered through mood, through expectation, through how much the person wanted the exercise to work, through what they had for lunch. The left nostril wins clearly and repeatably in the heart and in the brain waves, in the machinery. In the same breath, the right nostril can win in the diary. Both can be true. They are answers to different questions. And notice, this is the thing. The very same rude study that handed the calmness crown to the right nostril also found that the left nostril did something the right could not. It quieted the wandering of the mind. It pulled back that restless drift of thought, the part of you that will not stop rehearsing tomorrow at 2 in the morning, which is precisely the thing that keeps a tired person awake. So even the study that seemed to demolish my case turned around and, without meaning to, handed me the most important brick in it. The left channel may not always make you say the word calm, but it stills the churning. And for the purpose of falling asleep, the churning is the enemy, not the questionnaire. Now let me come back to that reaction time business, because I told you I would not tie it off and I have left it dangling on purpose. The way you leave a loose thread so you remember to come back to the coat. When people breathed through the left nostril for 2 weeks, their reaction time got faster. The ear test dropped from about 164 milliseconds to about 144. The eye test dropped from about 190 milliseconds to about 164. Faster. Quicker to answer, quicker to see, quicker to hear. And this ought to bother you if you have been listening, because I have spent all this time telling you the left nostril calms you down. How does calming you down make you faster? Are those not opposites? Does not relaxing mean slowing, dulling, going soft at the edges? And here is where I have to correct something I let you believe earlier gently, because I let you believe it on purpose so I could correct it now. There are 2 completely different things a nervous system can do that both look, from the outside, like relaxing. The first is shutting down. Withdrawing. The animal that plays dead, the person who goes gray and foggy and slow. That is one kind of quiet, and it is a defensive kind, a bracing against threat, and it does make you slower and duller. But there is a second kind of quiet that is not withdrawal at all. It is balance. It is the machinery humming smoothly with the brake gently resting on the wheel, the heartbeat wide and even, the blood vessels neither clenched nor slack, the mind clear because it has stopped spending itself on alarms that were never real. That second quiet does not dull you. It sharpens you. A frightened animal is not fast in the way that matters. It is jumpy, which is a different thing, all twitch and no aim. The calm animal, the one in balance, is the one that sees the movement in the grass and answers it cleanly without wasting a drop of itself. So the faster reaction time is not a contradiction of the calming. It is the fingerprint of which kind of calming this is. If the left nostril was simply switching you off, dimming the lights, you would get slower. It made you faster. Which tells us, better than any single questionnaire ever could, that what this breath builds is not the peace of shutting down. It is the peace of coming into tune. And that distinction, which cost me a small confession to make, is going to turn out to be the whole secret of where the real sleep comes from. The deep kind, the kind you cannot fake by simply lying still and willing your body to go dark. Because sleep, the good sleep, is not a shutting off either. We used to think it was. We were wrong about that too, and I want to show you how we found out, by going down now past the breath and the heartbeat into the slow electrical tides that roll across the sleeping brain and asking what those tides are actually for. So let us go down there together, quietly, the way you would wade into a lake at dusk, feeling the bottom with your feet before you trust your weight to it. When you fall asleep, something happens to the electrical chatter of the brain that, if you had never seen it before, you would not believe. The fast, bright, busy little ripples of waking, the ones the electrodes pick up as low, quick, scribbling lines, They do not simply fade out. They gather. They organize. They pool into enormous, slow, rolling swells that sweep across the whole surface of the cortex, front to back, like the long, low waves that come in across a harbor after a storm far out at sea. In the language of the electrodes, these are the delta waves, the slowest and the tallest of all the brain's rhythms, and they are the signature of the deepest sleep there is. Now hold that picture next to something we already found tonight, because the two of them fit together in a way that ought to make the hair on your arm stand up a little. Remember what the 64 electrodes told us about the left nostril. When the air came in on the left side only, the power went down across every band the machine could measure. Delta went down. Theta went down. Alpha, beta, gamma, all of them quieter. And out of that quieting rose one thing the researchers gave a careful name to, a prominent rhythm at the back of the head, toward the rear of the skull, which they read as a more restful, more meditative state of the whole machine. A posterior rhythm, something settling toward the back. I want you to notice how strange it is that a breath through one side of your nose should reach all the way to the back of your skull and change the color of the electrical weather there. And I want you to notice something stranger still, which is the direction the change points. The right nostril, when they measured it, spared the delta band. It left those slow, deep swells more or less alone, and it lit up the front of the head, the forward part, the part that plans and worries and leans into the next minute. The left nostril did the opposite. It let the whole cortex grow quiet, and it moved the weight of the activity backward and downward, away from the anxious prow of the brain toward the calmer stern. So here is a thing worth sitting with in the dark. Falling asleep, the real thing, is not the brain switching itself off like a lamp. If it were merely off, there would be nothing for the electrodes to draw. The pen would go flat. Instead, the pen swings wider than it ever does in waking. The sleeping brain is not silent. It is singing, very slowly, a single long note that every part of it joins. And what one slow breath through the left nostril seems to do is coax the machine a step in that same direction while you are still awake. Not all the way. You do not fall down asleep from one breath, thank goodness, or nobody could ever finish a bedtime story. But a step. The cortex hushing its fast, bright talk. The activity drifting backward, the front of the head, the warrior, loosening its grip. Let me put a question to you the way I would put it to a student who thought he already had the answer. If sleep is not an off switch, then what on earth is it for? Why would a brain, which spent all those millions of years learning to watch for the leopard in the grass, agree to lie down in the dark and stop watching? That is a genuinely dangerous thing to do. Evolution does not hand out dangerous habits for free. Whatever sleep is doing, it must be paying for that danger many times over, or we would not do it. We do not entirely know the full accounting yet, and I will not pretend to you that we do. But we know the electrical shape of it, those slow synchronized waves, and we know they are not idling. Something is being carried on those tides. Some sorting, some settling, some quiet housekeeping that the loud, fast, waking brain simply cannot do while it is busy answering the door. And here is where the breath comes back into the story, because I do not want you to think we have wandered away from the nose. We have not. We have wandered deeper into it. Think about what your own nose is doing right now, tonight, as you drift. Recall that the cycle itself, the slow trading of openness from one nostril to the other, does not keep its waking pace once you sleep. Awake, it turns over on the order of a couple of hours. Asleep, it stretches out, slowing to something closer to 4.5 hours between turns. The nose, too, downshifts. The same hydraulic switch that flips every couple of hours while you go about your day begins to hold its positions longer, to breathe on a slower clock, to match the longer swells rolling across the cortex above it. The whole system, nose and brain and heart, is gearing down together, like a great mill when the water is let off the wheel and the grinding stones turn slower and slower and the whole building stops trembling. So imagine then what you are actually arranging when you lie down and take that single deliberate slow breath through the left side. You are not forcing sleep. You cannot force sleep, and the harder you try, the further it runs, as anyone who has ever lain awake staring at a ceiling can tell you. What you are doing is quieter and cleverer than forcing. You are nudging the machine toward the very state it wants to fall into anyway. You are feeding it the input that hushes the cortex, that shifts the weight to the back of the head, that lifts the parasympathetic side, the rest and men side, up over the alarm side. You are, in a sense, whispering to the brain in its own sleeping language before it has quite fallen asleep, telling it, in the only grammar it understands, that the leopard is gone and the grass is safe and it may lie down now. And notice, please, that this connects straight back to the small confession I made a little while ago, the one about reaction time. I told you that the left nostril made people faster, not slower, and that this proved the calm it built was the calm of coming into tune rather than the calm of shutting down. Watch how that same distinction reappears here, wearing different clothes. Deep sleep, the slow wave kind, is not the brain gone slack and dead. It is the brain gone into its most perfectly tuned rhythm, every region humming the same slow note in step. That is why you wake from good sleep sharper and not duller. The slowness is not weakness, it is coordination. The whole orchestra, instead of 100 instruments each sawing away at its own frantic tune, has finally agreed on one long sustained chord, pianissimo, held across the entire hall. And a breath through the left nostril, it seems, hands the orchestra the tuning note. Now I can already hear the sharp student in the back row, the one who never lets me get away with anything, and I love him for it. He says, "All right, but you have been telling me for the last while that the right hemisphere lights up, the parasympathetic side lifts, the alpha climbs at the back, the theta threads its way along the midline where the default mode network lives, that dreamy inward turning circuit that hums when you stop attending to the outside world and drift into your own interior." Fine, he says. But how does a signal that starts as nothing more than cold air brushing a patch of wet tissue on the left wall of a nostril turn into a change in the deepest architecture of sleep? Where is the thread that runs all the way from the one to the other? That, I think, is exactly the right thing to be impatient about, and it is the thread we are going to follow now, hand over hand, back up out of the deep water. Because we have the two ends of it already, lying on our laps, and we have not yet tied them together. At one end, cold air, a cold-loving channel in a nerve, a whisper of firing that rises when the air runs faster and cooler over the tissue. At the other end, those great slow tides in the sleeping cortex and the leaning of the whole nervous system toward rest. In between there is a road, an actual anatomical road with actual stops along it, and we have been driving past several of those stops all night without slowing down to look at them properly. It is time we did. It is time we asked, very plainly, how a nerve that only knows how to say cold and warm, fast and slow, ends up rearranging the electrical weather of an entire brain, and why the left branch of that road should end somewhere so different from the right. So let us drive it slowly, this road, and stop at each turn. The first stretch we know. The cold air pours over the mucosa faster on the open side, and the little cold-loving gates in the trigeminal endings swing open and let their small current of firing run inward. That is the on-ramp. Now the trigeminal nerve is a great trunk, one of the thickest cables coming off the brainstem, and it does not simply carry a message to one tidy mailbox and stop. It fans. It sends branches into a cluster of nuclei sitting low in the brainstem, and from there fibers climb, and some of those fibers lean toward a region we have been circling all night without naming it squarely. The hypothalamus, a lump of tissue no bigger than an almond, tucked underneath the rest, and yet it is the thermostat, the water gauge, the appetite clerk, and the master switch for the whole slow machinery of rest and alarm. When the yogis spoke of a channel that cools, they had no way to see this almond. But the road from the cold nerve runs almost straight to it. And here is the first thing worth pausing over, because it is the hinge on which the whole left-right business turns. The signal from your left nostril does not immediately cross to the other side of your head. It climbs, at least at first, on the same side it started. Ipsilateral, the anatomists say, which only means same-sided. Left nostril, left side climb. That already should make you suspicious, because you have surely heard the old schoolroom fact that the body crosses over, that the left of you is run by the right of your brain and the right of you by the left. And that is true for a great deal, Move your right hand, and the command came from the left. But this cold air signal begins by staying home, on its own side, and only later does the crossing enter the story. So we have to hold both facts at once, and not let go of either. The airflow signal starts left, the brain state it finally produces leans right. Somewhere between those two, the road bends across the midline, and finding that bend is the whole game. Let me put it in a Homelier way first, because the anatomy can start to feel like a subway map you are too tired to read. Imagine a large old house with two staircases, one on each side, and a housekeeper who tends the fires. When someone comes in cold and damp through the left door, stamping and shivering, the housekeeper does not run to the left hearth. She has a peculiar arrangement in this house. The left door is wired, by a long habit of the building, to the fireplace in the right wing. Cold coming in the left means warmth being banked and settled in the right. And the right wing of this house happens to be the quiet wing, the wing with the deep chairs and the low lamps, where nobody argues and the clocks tick slow. The left wing is the busy one, the counting house, all sharp pencils and quick sums. So a cold draft at the left door does not merely warm a room. It shifts the mood of the entire household toward the quiet wing. That is the shape of the thing. Now let us see whether the real tissue actually behaves like my imaginary house, or whether I am just telling you a pretty story. The evidence that it does behave this way is not one measurement, but a stack of them leaning on each other. Take first the plain fact that airflow forced through one nostril, held there deliberately, tilts the balance of activity between the two halves of the cortex. Right nostril breathing tends to rouse the left half, the verbal, forward-leaning, sharp pencil half. Left nostril breathing tends to rouse the right half, the spatial, gathering, quiet wing half. This is not folklore. People have sat in laboratories with airflow restricted to one side and then been handed little tasks, some verbal, some spatial, and the scores tilt in exactly the direction the tissue map predicts. When the right hemisphere is favored, the spatial jobs get easier. There was a study of some 50 healthy young women, and after a spell of left nostril breathing, their memory for spans of numbers and for positions in space climbed in a way that plain chance will not explain. Numbers held forward in the mind, numbers held and then reversed, positions remembered. All of them rose, and the honest authors, I like them for this, wrote down plainly that the exact machinery by which one nostril reaches into the central nervous system is not clearly understood. That is a scientist telling the truth. We can see the effect, we can trace much of the road, we cannot yet swear to every rivet in the bridge that carries it across the midline. Hold on to that honesty. It matters more than any single number. Now, why should the right half of the brain be the quiet wing at all? This is the part that is genuinely contested, and I will not pretend to you that it is settled the way the boiling point of water is settled. But there is a real and repeated finding that the two hemispheres are not even-handed about the body's slow machinery. The right side leans toward the branch that rests and digests, that slows the heart and loosens the gut and lets the pupils shrink back down. The left side leans toward the branch that speeds and sharpens, that readies you to run or to fight. It is not that one half is asleep and the other awake. It is a leaning, a bias, a thumb resting gently on one pan of the scale. But a gentle thumb, applied steadily, moves the whole balance. So if the cold signal from the left nostril really does climb, and by whatever crossing, favor the right hemisphere, then it is pressing on exactly the pan that slows the heart. And the heart, as we will keep seeing, tells the truth about all of this in a language we can actually record. There is a second, quieter piece of evidence for the crossing, and I find it lovely because you can almost feel it in your own body without any laboratory at all. Lie down on your right side the way a tired person naturally curls. Something happens in the nose. The lower nostril, the right one now pressed toward the pillow, tends to swell and close. And as it closes, the upper one, the left, opens. This has been measured, and the shift is real, not imagined, unlikely by a wide margin to be accident. Now think about what that means woven together with everything we have said. The very posture a body falls into when it wants to sleep, curled onto the right side, is a posture that opens the left nostril, and the open left nostril feeds the cold signal that leans the brain toward its quiet wing. The old instruction to lie on your right side when you cannot settle is not a superstition dressed up in robes. It is a lever. You change the shape of your body, and the shape of your body changes which nostril breathes, and which nostril breathes changes by this long ipsilateral then crossing road, the weather in your cortex. The posture and the physiology are the same gesture seen from two ends. So watch how the pieces are beginning to seat themselves. We have a cold receptor that speaks only of temperature and speed. We have a trigeminal cable that carries its whisper inward and lays it, still on its own side, near the almond that governs rest. We have an almond that reaches up into the two halves of the brain unevenly. We have a right half that leans towards slowing and settling. And we have a body posture that quietly loads the whole chain toward the left nostril the moment you lie down to sleep. 5 facts, and none of them alone would convince a careful person of anything. A cold nerve is just a cold nerve. A leaning hemisphere is just a lean. But laid end to end, pointing the same way, they start to look less like 5 coincidences and more like one mechanism seen from 5 windows. And yet, I promised you at the start that this was a detective story, and a good detective does not fall in love with the first suspect who fits. Everything I have just told you points cleanly toward the left nostril as the calming channel. The old texts say so, the cold receptor allows it, the crossing road delivers it, the heart rate variability confirms it, the sleeping posture loads it. It is a tidy case. It is almost too tidy. And whenever a case in physics or in physiology gets too tidy too early, that is precisely the moment to go looking for the fact that does not fit, the witness whose story contradicts all the others. Because that awkward witness is usually not a liar. Usually the awkward witness is the one who understands something the tidy ones have missed. We are going to find that witness soon. There is a study, a small and careful one, that watched people breathe through one nostril for days and then asked them, simply, how calm do you feel now? And the answer it got back is not the answer this whole beautiful chain would lead you to expect. It points of all directions toward the right. So before we let ourselves be satisfied, before we tie the thread off and call it finished, we are going to have to sit with a result that seems on its face to knock the whole structure sideways. Let us walk toward it slowly. The way you approach a thing you suspect is going to teach you something you did not want to learn. So let us meet the awkward witness properly and give it the courtesy of its full story before we decide what to do with it. In the year 2024, a small and careful team ran what they called a pilot trial. 20 people, 8 days of training. Nothing enormous, nothing sweeping, just a modest little experiment done with attention. They split the people up. They taught some of them to breathe only through the left nostril, and they taught others to breathe only through the right, and then, day by day, they asked the plain human question. How calm do you feel? How much of your restlessness has settled? And when they added up the numbers, the right nostril, the very channel our whole chain of reasoning has been calling the alarm bell, the sympathetic side, the fight side, the one that opens the eyes and lifts the shoulders, that side came back with a larger drop in stress. On their scale, the right nostril people reported a fall in agitation of about 1.9, and the left nostril people, our supposed heroes, reported a fall of about 0.75. Better than 2 to 1 and pointing the wrong way. Now I want you to feel how uncomfortable that is, because if you do not feel it, you cannot appreciate what comes next. We have spent this whole night building a staircase. The erectile tissue in the nose, the hypothalamus choosing sides, the cold receptor whispering to the trigeminal nerve, the left airflow lighting the right hemisphere, the 64 electrodes finding a quiet posterior rhythm, the heart opening up its variability like a hand unclenching. Every step held, and then a group of 20 people, asked in plain words how they felt, hand us a result that seems to say the staircase leads to the basement. If I were the sort of investigator who only wanted to be right, I would bury this study. I would leave it out of the talk. And that, precisely that temptation to hide the inconvenient thing, is the surest sign that the inconvenient thing has something to teach. So let us not hide it. Let us hold it up to the light and turn it slowly. The first thing to notice is what the very same study found in its other measurements, because a good witness rarely says only one thing. The same 20 people over the same 8 days showed something different when the researchers looked not at reported calm, but at mind wandering, at how much the attention drifted and scattered. There the left nostril won. The left nostril breathers had their minds wander less. So the awkward witness is not simply contradicting us. The awkward witness is saying, listen carefully, these two things you have been treating as one thing are not one thing. Feeling calm and having a settled, gathered mind are not the same measurement, and they do not always move together. Sit with that, because it is deeper than it looks. We use the word calm as if it named a single quantity, the way weight names a single quantity. But calm is not one dial. When you ask a person how calm they feel, you are asking them to take a reading of an instrument they cannot see the inside of. An instrument built out of mood and expectation and how the last few minutes went and whether they think they are supposed to feel calmer now. A self-report is a genuine measurement. I do not sneer at it, but it is a measurement of the whole person reflecting on themselves. And that is a noisy, warm, complicated instrument. Meanwhile, the heart rate variability electrode does not care what you think is happening. It reads the vagus nerve pulling on the pacemaker of the heart, whether you notice or not. These are two different witnesses looking at two different rooms of the same house. And here is the thing an honest investigator has to admit out loud. When the objective instrument and the subjective report disagree, it does not automatically mean the instrument is right and the person is wrong. It means you have found a seam, a place where two truths are rubbing against each other, and the interesting physics is living in that seam. So what could put reported calm and measured vagal tone on opposite sides? Several things, and none of them require us to throw away a single step of what we built. Consider first that arousal, the plain wakeful lifting of the nervous system, is not the enemy of feeling settled. The right nostril, feeding the left hemisphere, nudges toward the alert, forward-leaning, engaged state. And for some people, in some moods, on some days, being gently switched on feels like relief. If your restlessness is the restlessness of a mind idling and grinding, a small lift of engagement can quiet the grinding better than a further softening would. The right side breath may have reduced their distress not by cooling them, but by giving the engine something to do, by turning scattered agitation into focused wakefulness. That is a real reduction in suffering. It is simply not the parasympathetic reduction our chain predicts. Two roads to feeling better, and this study caught the other one. Consider second the sheer smallness and shortness of it. 20 people. 8 days. A pilot, and the people who ran it called it a pilot precisely because they were honest about what 20 people can and cannot tell you. With numbers that small, the ordinary scatter of human beings, the fact that this one slept badly and that one had a hard week, can swamp the delicate signal we are hunting for. The heart rate variability studies that showed the left nostril opening the vagal brake, remember what they had underneath them. 20 experienced practitioners with electrodes reading the beat-to-beat interval of the heart directly. 106 young people in a 2-week trial with blood pressure falling by more than 10 millimeters of mercury on the top number, and reaction times quickening by 20 and 26 thousandths of a second, all with probabilities of chance below 1 in 10,000. When you weigh the evidence, you do not simply count the studies. You weigh how tightly each one was built and how loudly its signal came through. A whisper from a hard-edged instrument in 100 people outweighs a shout from a soft instrument in 20. But I do not want to wave the awkward witness away with statistics, because that would be its own kind of dishonesty, the kind where you keep the data you like and find reasons for the data you do not. So let me give the awkward witness the last and best thing it deserves, which is to be taken completely seriously. Suppose it is exactly right. Suppose that for a fair number of ordinary people, breathing through the right nostril really does, in the moment, make them feel calmer than the left. What would that teach us? It would teach us that the tradition, wise as it is, was speaking about a particular effect on a particular axis of the mind, and that we have been a little greedy in stretching the word calm to cover everything. The old text did not say the left channel makes you feel good. They said the left channel is cooling, lunar, quieting, the one you pierce to reduce heat and fire and agitation of a specific metabolic kind. That is a narrow and precise claim about lowering the burn, about pulling the body toward rest and digestion and the long, slow processes of night. And that narrow claim is exactly what the hard instruments confirm. The heart slows, the variability opens, the blood pressure eases, the cortex hushes across every band and settles into that posterior rhythm. None of that is a claim about whether you, sitting there reflecting on your own state, will label the feeling pleasant. Cooling and pleasant are not synonyms. A cool cloth on a fevered forehead lowers the temperature whether or not the feverish person, in their discomfort, reports feeling better in that first minute. So the awkward witness, taken at full strength, does not knock the staircase down. It reveals that the staircase was never leading to the place we casually thought. It was never leading to a simple sensation of niceness. It was leading all along to a measurable shift of the body toward the parasympathetic, toward the physiology of rest, and that shift is real and repeatable and shows up in the heart and the brain and the pressure of the blood, regardless of what the mind decides to say about it afterward. The self-report and the physiology can diverge precisely because the technique is doing something more specific and more physical than manufacturing a good mood. This is, if you let it be, one of the most reassuring lessons in all of experimental work. A theory that survives only its friendly evidence is a weak thing, propped up, waiting to fall. A theory that walks straight into its most hostile witness, sits down, listens to the whole complaint, and comes out the other side saying, "Yes, and here is why you and I were measuring different rooms," that theory has earned a little of your trust. We have not finished. There is still the question of why left should beat both nostrils together, the strange arithmetic where two open passages cancel into nothing while one open passage rings a bell. And there is the deeper matter of what all this says about the mind riding on a body that is quietly leaning first one way and then the other, all day, all night, without ever asking your permission. But the awkward witness has been heard, and it did not break us, it sharpened us. So let us carry that sharpened question forward into the strangest part of the whole affair, the part where doing less turns out to do more. So picture two bells hanging side by side in a tower. If you strike them both at once with equal force in the same instant, you do get sound. Nobody could say the tower is silent. But you get a kind of thick, muddled ring, two notes on top of each other, and the ear cannot quite pick out a melody from it. Now strike only the left bell, and let the right one hang still. Suddenly there is a clean tone, a single pitch, something the ear can follow and lean toward and rest on. That is very close to what seems to be happening inside your head when you breathe through one nostril instead of two. Think about what the brain is actually receiving. Down at the base, in that little walnut of tissue we keep coming back to, the hypothalamus, there is a tally being kept. It listens to the cold receptors on the left side of the nose, and it listens to the cold receptors on the right side of the nose, and it is, in a rough way, comparing them. When both nostrils are wide open and air is rushing evenly through each, the left side reports a strong cooling, and the right side reports a strong cooling, and these two loud reports arrive at nearly the same moment with nearly the same size. And what does the tally read? It reads balanced. It reads no particular reason to lean. The two signals do not add up into something twice as calming. In a sense, they wash each other out. The way two children pushing on opposite sides of a door leave the door standing exactly where it was, even though both are pushing with all their strength. That is the peculiar arithmetic I promised you. Effort on both sides can produce stillness in the middle, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is happening symmetrically and symmetry has no direction to point in. The brain, faced with a balanced ledger, does not throw itself toward the resting side or the rousing side. It stays roughly where it was. Now close off the right nostril and breathe only through the left. The right side of the nose goes quiet. Its cold receptors, starved of moving air, barely whisper. And the left side, carrying the whole tide of your breath now, cools hard and fires strong. The tally at the base of the brain is no longer balanced. It is lopsided, and lopsided in a very particular direction. The direction that in most people leans the hidden switch toward rest. One clean tone instead of two muddled ones. One bell instead of two. The signal is not louder in total. In fact, in total, less air is moving because you have shut half the door. And yet the message is clearer because it is no longer being cancelled by its own mirror image. I find this genuinely lovely, and a little bit funny because it turns our ordinary intuition upside down. We tend to believe that more of a good thing is better. If one open nostril calms you, surely two should calm you twice as fast. But calming, it turns out, is not a quantity you pour in. It is a lean, a tilt, a taking of sides. And you cannot take a side by pushing equally on both. The very evenness that feels so natural, so obviously fair, is exactly what prevents the tilt. To lean the boat, you must put your weight on one rail, not stand politely in the center. And here is where those careful electrode studies come back and tap us on the shoulder, because they saw precisely this. Remember, the bilateral breathing, the back and forth alternate kind, actually pushed down the alpha and the mu rhythms even harder than the left-only breathing did. If you were grading on that one number alone, you might crown the two-sided method the winner. But the two-sided method did not produce that focused, localized signature, that pooling of connectivity in one posterior corner, that midline conversation running front to back along the center of the head. It quieted things broadly, like turning down every lamp in the house a little. The left-only breathing did something more surgical. It lit one specific room warmly while letting the message concentrate there instead of spreading out and dissolving. Broad and shallow on one hand, narrow and deep on the other. And it appears to be the narrow, deep, one-sided thing that rings the particular bell we are chasing. So doing less, breathing through one passage rather than two, moving less total air, actually delivers more of the specific effect. That is the sense in which less does more. Not less effort in the lazy sense. Less symmetry, less cancellation. A willingness to be lopsided. Now let me pull on a loose thread hanging off all of this, because it leads somewhere that will make you smile the next time you lie down to sleep. If the tilt of the whole nervous system can be nudged by which nostril is carrying the air, and if which nostril is carrying the air is set by that slow hydraulic switch cycling every couple of hours, then here is a natural question. Can you cheat the switch? Can you reach in from the outside and tip it the way you want, without any fancy technique at all, without even thinking about your breath? It turns out you can, and the method is so simple, it sounds like an old wives' tale, except the measurements back it up. Lie down on your right side. Just that. Rest your body on the right flank, the way you might curl up on a couch. And within a while, the right nostril, the one pressed toward the ground, tends to congest, to swell shut, while the left nostril, the upper one, tends to open. This was checked carefully, and the shift toward left nostril dominance when lying on the right side held up statistically, comfortably past the point where you could shrug it off as coincidence. Think about what that means. Grandmothers and yoga teachers have said for a very long time, if you are agitated and you want to settle, lie on your right side. And it always sounded like folklore, a soothing superstition. But there is a plumbing explanation sitting right underneath it. Lying on the right side congests the lower nostril, opens the upper one, tilts the airflow toward the left passage. And the left passage, as we have spent this whole evening establishing, leans the hidden switch toward the resting branch. The old advice was a shortcut to left nostril breathing that nobody needed to name, discovered by feel, passed down by results, ages before anyone pressed a measuring device into a sleeper's nose. Why should lying on a side congest the lower nostril? Nobody has to invent anything exotic here. There are pressure sensors in the skin of the armpit and the flank, and there is simple gravity pooling blood in the tissues that hang lowest, and both of these seem to feed into that same autonomic tally, nudging the erectile tissue on the downside to swell and the upside to shrink. Your body is in effect reading its own posture and adjusting the valves in your face to match. Roll to the other side in your sleep, and after a while the whole arrangement quietly reverses, the newly lower nostril closing, the newly upper one opening, and you never wake, never notice, never consent. The switch just goes on flipping, now driven by the clock, now overridden by which shoulder you happen to be resting on. I want you to sit with that picture for a moment, because it is the strangest and most intimate part of this whole investigation. All day and all night, whether you are arguing or dreaming or standing in a kitchen waiting for water to boil, there is a slow pendulum swinging inside your nose. It congests one side, opens the other, holds for a couple of hours, and swings back. And riding on that pendulum, faintly but really, is a tilt in the balance of your two great nerve branches, the rousing one and the resting one, which means that some part of how alert you feel, how forward-leaning or how settled, is being gently biased by a hydraulic cycle you have never once controlled and, until tonight, probably never knew was there. The technique we have been circling, the deliberate left nostril breathing, is really nothing more than you taking the wheel of a pendulum that has been swinging on its own your entire life. You are not installing a new machine. The machine was always running. You are simply, for a few quiet minutes, reaching in and holding it steady on the resting side, refusing to let the clock swing it back, refusing to let symmetry cancel it out. You lean the boat on purpose. And this raises the deeper matter I set aside earlier, the one about a mind riding on a body that leans without asking. Because if a tilt in your nose can bias your brain, then the old clean picture, the one where the mind sits up in the tower like a captain and sends orders down to an obedient body, that picture is not quite right. The traffic runs both ways. The body is forever murmuring up to the mind, and some of what we call mood, some of what we call being sharp or being soft, is the mind listening to those murmurs and coloring itself accordingly. We are about to follow that thread all the way down into what it means that you can change how you feel by changing what your nose reports, and whether the feeling was ever as free-floating and disembodied as it seemed. But first, let us make sure we understand exactly how strong that upward whisper really is. Consider what it actually takes to move a heart. The heart is not a shy little thing. It is a fist of muscle that has been beating since before you were born, and it keeps its own time whether you attend to it or not. And yet, in those career practitioners in the laboratory, 20 of them, average age around 44, something as gentle as steering the breath through the left side of the nose slid the resting heart from roughly 72 beats a minute down towards 69. Only about 3 beats. You might shrug at 3 beats. But watch what happened underneath that number, in the trembling of the beat itself, because that is where the real story hides. There is a measure called the standard deviation of the intervals between heartbeats, and I know that is a mouthful, so let me hand you the picture instead. Imagine you are tapping your finger to keep time with a song, and the song is your own pulse. If you are tense, wound tight, ready to run, your taps come out mechanical, evenly spaced, monotonous, like a cheap metronome that has forgotten how to swing. If you are at ease, deeply at ease, the taps loosen. They breathe. They speed a hair on the inhale and drift on the exhale, and that looseness, that gentle wandering of the interval, is not the heart failing to keep time. It is the heart being allowed to listen to the breath. A stiff, regular pulse is a frightened pulse. A supple, wandering pulse is a calm one. That is backwards from what most people would guess, and it is one of the loveliest inversions in all of the body. So watch the numbers loosen. That standard deviation climbed from about 42 milliseconds up to nearly 78. It nearly doubled. And the other marker, the one that tracks the fast beat-to-beat jitter most tightly tied to the wandering nerve, the vagus, that one rose from about 34 milliseconds to roughly 47. Both of those are the fingerprints of the rest and digest branch taking the wheel. And here is the detail the experimenters underlined, the one that keeps us honest in this whole investigation. That fast jitter, the vagal fingerprint, rose more during the left nostril breathing than during the right. Not equally. More on the left. The old text said the moon channel was the cooling one, and the heart, when you actually wired it up and listened, agreed. Now I want you to sit with how strange that chain of custody is. A little wash of cool air, biased to one side of a passage the width of a drinking straw, ends up loosening the timing of a muscle in your chest. The nose does not touch the heart. There is no wire running from one to the other in any direct sense. The message climbs from the nasal lining up the trigeminal nerve to the brainstem and the hypothalamus, gets sorted and lateralized, tips the balance of the two autonomic branches, and only then does the wandering nerve send its slow, patient command back down to the little knot of pacemaker cells at the top of the heart, telling them, gently, there is no hurry tonight. That whole errand happens in the time it takes you to let one breath out. The upward whisper is not a metaphor. It is a real signal with a real address, and the heart answers the mail. And it is not only the heart that answers. Take those 106 young people. all of them somewhere between 18 and 25, who breathe through the left nostril alone at that slow, resonant pace, 6 breaths a minute, 3/4 of an hour each day for 2 weeks. Their blood pressure came down, and not by a trifle. The upper number, the systolic, the pressure at the peak of each beat fell by better than 10 points. The lower number came down too, by about 5.5. The pulse eased. The breathing itself grew slower and quieter, as if the whole machine had been let off a notch. But the piece I find most telling is not in the plumbing at all. It is in the reflexes. They measured how fast these young people could react to a sound and to a flash of light, the raw time between the world poking them and their finger answering. And the times got shorter. The reaction to a sound dropped by about 20 milliseconds. The reaction to a light dropped by more than 26. Now stop and think about what that means, because it cuts against a lazy assumption. You might expect that anything that calms a person makes them slower, duller, sleepier at the switch. Calm the animal, and surely you dull its edge. But that is not what the stopwatch found. Calm, here, made them quicker. The nervous system, relieved of the low static hum of being braced and defended, could spend its attention on the actual signal. A quiet room lets you hear a whisper. A quieted nervous system lets you catch a flash of light a hair sooner. Calm is not the same as slow. Calm is clean. That is a distinction worth carrying to bed with you. And still the whisper reaches further, up into memory, into the very furniture of thought. There were 51 young women, average age near 22, and after they breathed through the left nostril, their memory span opened up in a way it did not with the right. Ask a person to hear a string of digits and say them straight back, and the count they can hold climbed from about 6 up to 8. Ask them to say the digits back in reverse, a harder trick because now you must hold the string and turn it around in the dark, and that climbed too, from about 5 up to 7. And a test of spatial memory, remembering where things sit in a little world, that rose as well. All of it more with the left than the right. The right hemisphere, the one the left nostril preferentially wakes, is the hemisphere with a special fondness for space, for the where of things, for the shape of a room held behind the eyes. So of course the spatial memory bloomed. The nose leaned the brain toward the hemisphere that happens to be good at that, and the brain, obligingly, got better at it. I have to be square with you, because we are detectives and not salesmen. The very people who ran that memory study wrote down in plain words that they do not fully understand how one-sided breathing reaches into the central nervous system and does this. They saw the effect clearly. They could not yet draw you the complete circuit diagram. And that honesty is not a weakness in the story. It is the shape of real knowledge at its edge. We have a strong, repeated, measurable finding, and we have a mechanism that is sketched in confident pencil for the first few steps and then fades into a region where we are still guessing at the wiring. A good investigator holds both of those in the same hand without flinching. The effect is real. The full explanation is not finished. Both true at once. So let me gather what the upward whisper has done, just so we feel its full weight before we press on. It loosened the timing of the heart. It brought down the pressure in the arteries. It sharpened the reflexes rather than dulling them. It widened the span of what the mind could hold. It brightened the memory for space. And in the deep electrical hum of the cortex, remember, it hushed every band at once and raised that slow, restful rhythm at the back of the head. One thin, biased draft of cool air sensed by a cold detecting channel on a nerve, and all of that downstream. If you had told me, before I saw the measurements, that so much of what we call a person's state could be nudged from so small a lever, I would have wanted to see it 3 times before I believed it. And it has been seen more than 3 times, by different hands, with different instruments, on different people. Which forces the uncomfortable question I promised we would follow all the way down. If the state of your mind can be steered by the report from your nose, then where exactly does the mood live? We like to imagine a feeling as a weather that settles over us from somewhere, a private climate that the mind generates on its own and the body merely reports. But look at what we have. Congest one side of a nose, and the balance of the whole nervous system tips. Lie down on your right side, and the body itself does the congesting for you, shifting the open channel to the left, no yoga required. The mood, it seems, is not floating serenely above the flesh, sending down decrees. The mood is partly assembled, moment to moment, out of exactly these bodily reports: the pressure in a vessel, the cooling on a membrane, the loosening of a beat. The captain in the tower is reading the ship to know his own mind. And yet I do not want to hand you the opposite error tied up in a bow, because that would be just as false and a good deal more fashionable. It would be too neat to say you are nothing but your nose, that a mood is only plumbing and draft, that there is no captain at all, only the ship steering itself. That cannot be the whole story either, and I will show you why. Because there is a clue we have been circling and have not yet turned over. Somebody ran the experiment the other way. Somebody found the right nostril, the fiery one, the wrong one by every tradition, coming out ahead on the one thing you would swear the left should own. And when a good clue points backwards, you do not look away from it. You lean toward it. So let us go and turn that stone over, gently in the quiet, and see what has been living underneath. So we go, and the underneath is not what the story wanted. In that little trial, 8 days of practice, 20 people, it was the right nostril, the hot one, the fiery channel that every old text warns you off if you want to sleep, that came out ahead on calmness. The number they wrote down for the right side was almost 2 on their little scale of settling down, and the left, the moon channel, the one this whole lecture has been leaning on, gave back less than 1. If you were rooting for the left, and by now I suspect you were, that is a slap. And you should feel it. Do not soften it. A good investigator does not flinch when the evidence turns on him, but look closely at what was measured, because this is where the whole case cracks open into something better than a verdict. They asked people how they felt. They handed them a form and a pencil and said, "Tell me how calm you are, tell me how restless," and the right nostril won that little contest. And the very same study, in the same 8 days, found that the left nostril quieted the wandering mind more than the right. So one nostril made the person say, "I feel settled," and the other nostril made the mind stop drifting off down its little side roads. Those are not the same thing. We keep wanting them to be the same thing, and they refuse. Here is the trouble with asking a person how calm they are. You are asking the captain to grade the ship, and the captain has opinions, and the captain has a bad night behind him, and the captain notices some things and misses others. A man can be calm in his body and swear he is agitated, because agitation is loud and calm is quiet, and the loud thing always gets reported. When you strap the electrodes on and watch the heart's beat-to-beat spacing widen, when you watch the slow rhythm bloom at the back of the skull, the body is not filling out a form. It cannot lie to you, because it does not know it is being asked. That is why all through this investigation I have trusted the heart and the scalp over the mouth. Not because people are liars, because the thing we are chasing lives below the floor of what a person can feel and name. So the twist does not sink the case, it sharpens it. It tells you that calming is not one thing with one address. There is the calm you can feel and speak, and there is the calm that shows up only in the spacing of heartbeats and the color of a brain rhythm, and a single slow breath through a single side of your nose does not have to move both of them the same way at the same time. The left nostril, on the evidence we have gathered, tugs hardest on the machinery underneath, the vagal brake, the parasympathetic side, the restful back of the head rhythm. Whether the person then reports feeling wonderful is a separate question with a separate and messier answer, tangled up in mood and expectation and what kind of day it was. And that, if you sit with it, is not a disappointment. It is the honest shape of a living thing. We wanted a switch. One nostril, one effect, click, calm. Nature almost never gives you a switch. It gives you a knob connected to 3 other knobs, and turning one nudges the others in ways that depend on where they already were. The nose is a knob. It is a real knob, wired to real circuitry, with a genuine leftward lean built into the population, with a 1,000-year-old instruction manual that turned out to be pointing at something true. But it is a knob on an instrument that is also being played by your posture, your last meal, your worries, the hour, and the simple fact of whether you are breathing slowly at all. Turn the knob, and you have done something. You have not commanded the whole orchestra. Let me gather the threads now, quietly, the way you coil a rope at the end of the day. We started with a puzzle sitting in the middle of your own face, one side more open than the other, chosen for you, changing on a slow clock you never set. We found the plumbing, the little sponge of erectile tissue in the turbinate, swelling and shrinking under the two arms of the autonomic nerves, one arm squeezing while the other loosens. We found the messenger, the cold sensing channel on the trigeminal nerve, reading the draft of your own breath and reporting it upward. We chased two tempting explanations, that it is only resistance and that it is only slow breathing, and we found both were real and neither was enough, because the same slowness through both nostrils does not leave the same fingerprint. We followed the signal as it took sides, left airflow leaning on the right hemisphere leaning toward rest. We watched 64 electrodes find a hush spreading across every rhythm and a slow tide gathering at the back of the head. We watched the heart widen its spacing and drop its rate. And then we let the awkward clue turn the whole thing honest. What are you left holding? Something smaller than a miracle and larger than a trick. Tonight, without buying anything, without believing anything, you can close the right side of your nose with a fingertip and draw one long, unhurried breath through the left, slow enough that the out-breath is longer than the in-breath, and you will have leaned gently on the oldest break in your body. You may or may not feel a wave of peace. The form in your head may report nothing at all, but down in the spacing of your heartbeats, in a language you cannot hear, something will very likely answer. The moon channel, the old ones called it, the cooling one. They had no electrodes and no word for the vagus nerve and no map of the hypothalamus, and they were, in the part that matters, right. There is a kind of humility the nose teaches if you let it. Here is a system running its slow tide inside you every hour of your life, switching sides while you argue and eat and sleep, wired straight into the machinery of mood, and you never once noticed. It asked nothing of you. It kept no diary you could read. And it was steering, a little all along. The wonder is not that one breath through one nostril can calm you. The wonder is how much of you is already being quietly conducted below the waterline by organs you never think to thank, in a grammar older than any language, while the captain up in the tower believes he is the one holding the wheel. So the next time the night is loud and the mind will not stop pacing, you might remember that you carry a small, silent instrument behind your face, one that the moon watchers found before the physicians did, and that the whole of it cost you nothing but the willingness to breathe slowly, on purpose, through the quieter side. Close your eyes. Find the left. Let the breath go out longer than it came in. And somewhere below the floor of what you can feel, a tide you never asked for turns and lets you down easy into the dark.